All right. And we are live. We'll wait for some people to come on. I'm going to quick check my Facebook to make sure I'm broadcasting on that page. Were you able to, did you advertise it on your page?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I see two.
Just wait for some people to come on here.
There's 8 people on. Count 12, 15. Look at
it. We got people coming on. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you. We're just waiting for a few more of you to hop on. We've got a great episode planned. This is, of course, Wisconsin Right Now Uncensored. I'm Jim Peeble-Varchuk here with Scarlett Johnson. And we're hoping to have Jessica join us. I think she's having some technical problems. But we will be shortly. We plan tonight on having founder and president of the Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty, Rick Esenberg. Just a godsend in the conservative world now.
Yes.
Especially with us losing the Supreme Court. So we're going to be asking him some questions about what he sees moving forward and what his plan is. Scarlett?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm very excited to talk to Rick. I was just pulling up the Will website while you were talking. Will, the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, has done so much work for parents' rights, defending parents in education, standing up for everything that we believe in, with Moms for Liberty. And they've actually, Will works with Moms for Liberty, and they've actually, one of the really great things that they do right now is on their website. They have a lot of resources for school board members and for parents and for teachers. And so they have a new effort where they're working with a lot of different groups across the state, including like School Choice Wisconsin, in a real effort to promote basically education free of politics, focused on academics, and restoring parental rights in education. So I really appreciate them.
Yeah. Good evening, Jessica. I'm glad you could make it. We're concerned that you weren't able to get in. How you doing?
Great.
Great. We are going to be waiting for Rick to be hopping on here. I think I just got an email from him. Let's see here. Oh, yes. Okay, he did not get my link here. All right. Well, guys, go ahead and talk. I guess resend him the link here.
Yeah, I was just saying everything that I appreciate about Will, and in particular, what they've been doing with education. They have a new project, Restoring American Education, where they work with School Choice Wisconsin and different legal groups, and they work with AFP and I believe the Badger Institute, and all collaborating, trying to figure out what we can do, with Evers as governor. What can we do when we don't have the power we can pass bills, but obviously they're not getting signed into law. And, so we're just trying to figure out, how do we unravel the Wisconsin DPI and all the damage that they have inflicted. And Will, during COVID, obviously they were heroes in the fact that they helped to reopen the schools for kids, get the masks off kids. They fought against a lot of the controversial, like critical race theory in education. So we're all, as parents, very grateful for Will.
Well, they're going to be more important than ever before, obviously. In the wake of, what happened with the left taking control of the state Supreme Court, I would say that Will is leading the charge. They're basically the cavalry at this point. The left has strategically moved their battle to the court system because they can't, win at the ballot box in enough local races. So they're, I think not trying to win in the battlefield of ideas anymore. They're trying to win in the court system. They now have outright control of the court. And so I think we asked Will on because they're going to be even more important than they were before. And they were incredibly important before, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Yes, there's these issues that are so important to us, like Act 10, and I put that coming up. School choice. What else? Jim, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I think, one thing about Will, and Rick should be coming on shortly. Will even came to our defense when we couldn't get the parole list for 2023. I'm sorry, 2022. And the parole commission refused to send that to us. So Will agreed to assist us in that, filed the lawsuit on our behalf. And the judge, who happened to be an Evers appointee, a Washington County judge, immediately ruled in favor of us. And
well, what a lot of people don't know is that Will's been coming to my defense for 15 years. What a lot of people don't know, I mean, I'm a full-time journalism instructor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. That's obviously a very liberal environment. And there was a decade where, I quite honestly felt very embattled. And there was a time when I turned to Will, and they wrote a letter in my defense because of some of the behavior that was going on behind the scenes, involving some of the, I don't want to, let's just say that in the UW system, there are a lot of professors with Marxist beliefs. And I guess I'm not being specific about any specific instructor or person, but it was incredibly difficult to work in that environment. And I turned to Will, and they helped me. And so, they have been in the trenches fighting tooth and nail for conservatives to be treated unfairly, for their ideas to be treated fairly, for a very long time. But I think we're going to see their influence absolutely escalate. I think they are where the battle is now at. They are the front line, right? They're the vanguard.
Well, I have kind of a funny story. They helped in many ways. In Mequon, when we were doing the recall, Dan Lunnington with Will helped Amber and I when the city of Mequon and the mayor, John Worth, tried to stop us from putting up signs when we were present, putting up signs asking people to sign our recall list. So for a while, we had to physically hold the signs. So that's pretty hard to do, where you're trying to get the attention of people. Hey, come sign our recall. But we couldn't have stakes in the ground. We couldn't even tape them to the table. They kept sending the left kept sending police over to come and remove any sign that, if we even laid it down for a minute, we were breaking an ordinance. But they wrote a letter, and that was helpful. And we were able to, the second half of our recall, we were able to put the signs in the ground. And they wrote a letter for us in Mequon, Thiensville, when we complained about what we called a racist pizza party, where a middle school principal had a pizza party and only invited the African-American and the Black kids in the school, and kids that were mixed race. It was actually quite odd when they weren't invited, or when one kid was supposed to be invited and said, why am I not invited? They basically were questioning the kids, what is their ethnic heritage in order to be invited to this pizza party. And so it made kids feel uncomfortable. There were kids crying, upset, and they couldn't bring their best friend, who, if their friend was white or Hispanic, they couldn't bring that friend to the pizza party. So it kind of blew up in their face. But Will kind of helped us when we were getting some legal counsel and to do some open records requests. And for many, I've worked with them so many times. I have so many things I'm working on with them now, helping school board members who aren't sure about, they're getting bad advice from their district attorneys, who usually work with the superintendents, and they're not being honest about what the law is currently on some of the hot, topics of the day, and even as simple as open records requests taking a long time to fill those requests, charging parents. I worked with one parent that was charged $600 because he was requesting the sex ed curriculum for his middle school daughter, and they tried to charge $600 to $1,200. So there's a lot of different ways that will help. Sometimes it's as simple as they help with an open records request, or they write a letter. And they're small in number, but they're mighty.
Very good. And we're still waiting for Rick here. And he's having a little technical issue that we're working out here with him. Last night, Jessica and I were honored to be at an event. The Southeast Wisconsin Republican women invited us to come speak at their event in Racine. And we had a great time. Got to meet a lot of people down there. And, it helped. It was very, they were very energized, very excited, and they helped kind of motivate us to continue the fight here. And thought we had some great conversations. I think we just lost Jessica here for a minute. But that's what we did last night.
Oh, that sounds fun. Last night I went to an event in Sheboygan, and it was regarding with a Lutheran doctor kind of talking more about the issues that parents are facing regarding issues like with Title IX and all that stuff. And that was very well attended. It was very good to see that when it was hailing and storming, that a large group of community members came out to become more informed about what's going on in our kids' schools, how they're being indoctrinated, and what we can do to stop it. And why the message there was really good, because it was, why should the religious communities get involved? I think a lot of times Christians of all faiths stay on the sidelines, and they don't think that they should be involved in politics. And right now, the message that I am sharing, and a lot of people are sharing, is we need you now more than ever. We really need the influence of God in this country. We need to bring God back into this country.
All right. Well, we now have Rick Esenberg with us. Rick, welcome. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Just want to introduce you to everyone that's watching. This is Rick Esenberg. He is the founder and president of the Wisconsin Institute Law and Liberty. They fight for, conservative values, principles, not only statewide, but nationally. And I think Rick is probably the leading expert on the Wisconsin Constitution. So, Rick, we talked a little bit before you came on how really important, especially now, will is to the state of Wisconsin now that liberals have taken control of the courts, and how really now you're going to be on the front lines here battling for us.
Yeah, we've managed to accomplish a lot in the last couple of years with respect to cases, strengthening things like academic freedom, separation of powers, the rule of law in the state of Wisconsin. And the environment is going to switch a little bit now. Janet Protasiewicz indicated that, she sees the Constitution and her role as a judge differently than perhaps we would see it. And the majority has traditionally seen it. She emphasized her values in signaling how she would decide cases. And typically, that's not what a judge does. A judge is supposed to decide cases based upon some authority other than his or her own preferences. You're supposed to decide cases based on the law and not on what you think is the right thing. The difficulty with this is that it puts a lot of things into play going forward. And so, you've heard a lot of conversations about, Act 10 perhaps being up for reconsideration, the redistricting decision, which is really less than just about a year old at this point. Perhaps school choice is on the line. Could be that voter ID is on the line. Just a whole host of things. Because when you suggest that the basis for your decision making are your political values, then it's difficult for us to rule out the possible reconsideration of any case. And so, the thing for us now, I think, is to step forward and to remind people that our Constitution isn't simply a vehicle for justices to impose their values, but something that establishes, even though people might disagree on exactly what it is, establishes a rule of law that must be adhered to. And that's the work we've got cut out for us. And I hope the majority will be receptive to what we have to say if these cases come up. And but we're certainly going to be there.
And as far as redistricting, what is it that they would be able to? Can you explain to everyone watching? Hypothetically, what could happen? How could they impact our elections through redistricting? What kind of things would come before them?
Yeah, so the problem, as you all know, that we select a legislature in the state of Wisconsin based upon geographic districts. We have 99 geographic districts in the Senate, or in the Assembly, 33 in the Senate. And whoever wins in this district gets a seat. And the problem that Democrats have traditionally had in Wisconsin and in many other states is that if you look at the state, it's sort of a sea of red with some very deep blue patches. And so when you use single member geographic districts to elect a legislature, like every state in the United States does, like Congress is elected, Democrats can find themselves at a disadvantage because their voters are heavily geographically concentrated. And that's not a function of unfairness. That's not a function of gerrymandering. That's a function of how we've chosen our democratic system of representation. It is a function of our democracy. Now, you can gerrymander to try to fix that by manipulating the maps in a way that makes up for this natural geographic disadvantage. You can't get to a Democratic majority in a state like Wisconsin. That's almost impossible to do. But you can make the balance of power in the legislature a lot closer. Now, what we keep hearing is we have to do that in the interest of fairness. But the problem, and the reason that the Wisconsin Supreme Court didn't do that, the United States Supreme Court would not entertain such a claim, is that deciding, which projected composition of legislators is the right one is itself a political act. It is itself gerrymandering. And I think the court rightly stayed away from that when it drew the maps in the spring of 2022. I hope it will continue to stay away from that, but certainly all the signals during the election campaign was that they're going to go back and they're going to try again. And 1 year later, they're going to, try to get the court to change what it did based upon, the result of a single judicial election.
Rick, one thing I was confused about was I know that the congressional maps went to SCOTUS, right, the U.S. Supreme Court, and ended there. And I know the legislative maps were kicked back to the state Supreme Court. But I've heard people like Brian Schimming say that they believe a new liberal controlled court will try to also redraw the congressional boundaries. That, for example, they'll try to redistrict Brian Stile out of office, that they'll try to redraw the district boundaries of Derek Van Orden's congressional seat in Western Wisconsin. In fact, I was speaking with Congressman Van Orden the other day, and he believes that they will try to do that. I was wondering if you could legally walk us through, would that be possible for them to do? And what's your take on that?
Well, as I started by saying, if your rule of decision is these are my values, it's very difficult to rule anything out because your values can be just about anything. But from a legal perspective, this is what happened. The Wisconsin Supreme Court announced in November of 21, in a case that we brought in at our request, that it would not take into account the expected political outcome of the maps, that it would draw the maps and it would essentially follow three principles. One was it would try to draw maps that were districts that were as compact as possible. So we don't want, districts that look like these sprawling coffee stains that, go across the state, that were contiguous, right? So that, you wouldn't have all these ins and outs and hitches. And so that, you'd have, somebody in Kenosha in the same district with somebody in Sheboygan. And they would make the least changes from the maps that had been drawn and approved by the legislature and the governor in 2011. And maps were submitted and they were considered by the court on that basis. Now, what happened is the court adopted Governor Evers' congressional maps. Governor Evers won on the congressional maps, and initially also won on the legislative maps. But what happened there is that we took the case up to the United States Supreme Court. We said that the court had improperly considered race in its selection of maps without establishing a violation of the Voting Rights Act. The U.S. Supreme Court agreed with us. They sent the case back to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and the Wisconsin Supreme Court at that point adopted the legislative maps. I think it would be very, very difficult, but of course, given the amorphous nature of what is supposed to control the outcome here, I think it would be very, very difficult and very potentially embarrassing for the court to come back and say, we are going to change the congressional maps, which were the very maps that were submitted by Governor Evers. And so, yes, I think it's right to say, it's not unfair to say that there could be an attempt to do that. I think that an attempt to do that would be essentially lawless and something that I'm not sure that that any court would do, but we'll see.
If they try to do something lawless, because I guess I'm less confident than you. I mean, Janet Prosewicz basically said, what she's planning on doing, which I found shocking considering the judicial ethics code. But let's say they act in a lawless way. Are you able to appeal such decisions, or is someone able to appeal such decisions to the U.S. Supreme Court? When is that possible versus it ends with the state constitution and the state court?
Well, certainly the argument that they're going to make is that the arguments that they're going to make are they're going to argue that the state constitution requires this type of partisan gerrymander to make up for the natural disadvantage that Democrats face. And that if their decision is based on the Wisconsin Constitution, the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't get to decide that because the Wisconsin Supreme Court is the last has last say on what the Wisconsin Constitution means. I think that there might be a problem here, however, in that the only way they could do this is to say that the Wisconsin Supreme Court in 2022 and 21 was wrong in saying that it was going to adopt a least changes approach. And the only way that they can do that is argue that there was some problem in the 2011 map. And I think to go back and do that when they challenged the 2011 maps and the United States Supreme Court rejected that challenge, I think that there may be a vehicle for federal review there if they try to touch the congressional maps. So again, all of this is, we'll kind of wait and see because this is it's pretty high level stuff, and redistricting only happens once every 10 years. So there's not a bunch of precedent that establishes all the ins and outs of how redistricting cases proceed. But I think to go back and try to redo those congressional maps would really be a hyper aggressive thing to do. And, you can say that I'm more confident than you are. And I can't, I won't disagree with you on that, but I just think that that's going to be a heavy lift and certainly something that I think would be very strenuously opposed by both the legislature and I think a group like ours, because the problem here is when you have a decision and then you have an election in which one seat changes, and then you think that you're going to go back and you're going to redo a lot of settled law, including something as significant as redistricting, one of the consequences of that is you undermine confidence in the courts. You turn the courts into another political institution. And I don't think that any justice, whether they're on the left or the right, should want to do that. That's typically not the way that we view our courts. And I think that we would all come to regret courts that were turned into simply another political body.
There's a question from the comments and it says, didn't Gill versus Whitford say gerrymandering was almost impossible because of political opinions that can change?
Yeah, so it's the problem here is, as I started out by saying, the Republicans, I used to teach election law. And one of the first things you do when you teach redistricting in an election law class is you kind of show how, usually use stars and circles, and you show how for any given number of stars and circles in a state, the legislative composition can change dramatically based upon where they live. And the problem that Democrats have, again, if you look at the city of Milwaukee, the state of Wisconsin, and you were to draw a map based upon how, assembly districts voted or precincts voted or counties voted, you would see that Wisconsin geographically, while it's purple when you add everything up, geographically it's a very red state with very, very blue splotches in Milwaukee and Madison and some of the college towns. And so there's no way that you can draw neutral maps in which Democrats will not be at a disadvantage because we elect legislators by geography. Equal number in each district, but by geographic districts. And so what the court was saying in Ruscio, which was eventually the case that resolved this issue, Gill got bounced back. It was saying, look, there's no way for a judge to say what the right composition is. You can't say, as the Democrats, I think, have often wanted to say, that the legislature, the composition of the legislature should match the statewide votes for Democrats and Republicans, because we don't elect our legislatures that way. There are countries in Europe that do that, right? They elect and they decide how many people are going to be in the Christian Democrats and how many people are going to be in the conservatives and how many people are going to be in the liberal Democrats. We don't do that. And we have single member districts. And there's no way to say what the right composition of the legislature would be that is fair and neutral and itself nonpartisan. Because if you look at the maps in Wisconsin, another thing you do when you teach election law is you kind of, because you're trying to amuse your students, because that's what professors do, of course, is they try to amuse their students, is you show them oddly shaped maps. And there have been a lot of oddly shaped maps in the history of redistricting, maps that look like gerrymander comes from Governor Jerry he created something that looked like a salamander. There are, coffee stain districts. There was an infamous district in Florida, which ran for 39 miles on each side of the median and along the interstate in order to connect two areas. But if you look at the maps in Wisconsin, they don't look like that. They don't look bizarre. They don't look strange. They're contiguous. They're compact. There was really very, very little difference between the governor's maps and the legislators' maps on various measures of whether districts were contiguous and compact. And so they don't look funny. They don't look odd. They're just not coming up with the right result. It was the argument that the Democrats were making in the Johnson case. And there is no neutral way to resolve that question. And that's why the United States Supreme Court stayed out of it. And it's why the Wisconsin Supreme Court, back in November of 21, in the case that we brought, stayed out of it.
Yes, for the side that's always claiming to love democracy and to restore our democracy, when things don't go the way they want, they seem more than happy to undermine the Constitution and tweak it to bend to their will.
Yeah, Rick, I'd like to get...
I'm sorry, Jim, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead, finish.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of ways in which that happens. So for example, one example would be the student loan case, right, which is now up before the Wisconsin Supreme Court, in which President Biden unilaterally decided to spend up to $1 trillion in forgiving student debt. Well, Congress never passed a law that did that. But the problem is whether or not you like that, whether or not you want your student loan forgiven, and I suppose if you have one, you just as soon have it forgiven as not. Is that in our democracy, right? We hear that term all the time, yes. Our democracy that we must preserve. In our democracy, the president doesn't make the laws, Congress makes the laws. Yes. And so when you depart from that and you don't follow the constitutionally prescribed method of making decisions, you are undermining our democracy.
Yes.
And so I think your point is very well taken.
I'm curious. So putting aside redistricting for a minute, but name anything else: Act 10, voter ID, school choice issues, gun rights issues, abortion questions, you name it. I'm wondering again. Do you see a federal question in a lot of those issues? Is there any avenue to take a crazy, lawless, liberal-controlled Wisconsin Supreme Court decision to SCOTUS? And I know that I'm sure it's probably very fact-specific on what like laws and things they ground their their decisions in. But I guess I'm curious about that.
It sort of depends upon what the issue is and how you decide it. For example, one of the things that people talk about is that there could be an attack on school choice. And traditionally, the attacks on school choice have been that school choice includes religious schools, and about 85% of choice schools are religious. Mm-hmm. So, and there used to be an argument that you could make if you were an opponent of school choice, that school choice violates provisions in state constitution that forbid aid to sectarian schools, or that they violate the Establishment Clause. But in a couple of recent cases, Espinosa and in a more recent case, the United States Supreme Court made clear that not only does including religious schools in a choice program not violate the Establishment Clause, it doesn't establish religion, but if you exclude otherwise eligible schools, you're violating the Free Exercise Clause. You are penalizing these schools for their decision to organize themselves around some, guiding faith. And so I think that challenge to school choice is dead. And if the Wisconsin Supreme Court were to go off on that basis, then I think there would be United States Supreme Court review. Sometimes when you have a case that goes before the Wisconsin Supreme Court and the court doesn't make quite clear how they're deciding the case, and they discuss a lot of federal cases and they decide what those federal cases mean, you will be able to get United States Supreme Court review. But it is very fact dependent, and it really depends on what the situation is. And there are issues that can be resolved on the basis of the state constitution. And this is why these elections for state Supreme Court are very, very important, because there are issues on which they really do have the final judicial say. Yep. And this is why whether you're left, liberal, progressive, or whether you're a conservative, or whether you're a MAGA, whatever your political orientation is, you should be very, very wary of a judicial candidate who says, this is how I'll decide cases, I'll give you what you want. Because if that's the rule, there will be, I guarantee you, there will be some election in the future, and there'll be some candidate that wins that you don't like, who you will be handing unchecked power to.
Along those lines, so Janet Protasiewicz, she tipped her hand and said how she was going to rule on many of the hot button cases. In particular, what we were talking about with gerrymandering, abortion. So will she be forced to recuse herself if those cases do come before the Wisconsin Supreme Court?
Yeah, that's a very that's a very sort of fact-specific question too. There's a case. Oh my gosh. I mean, I was going to say it was a recent case, but it's probably 20 years ago now, which probably says something about my age. The called Republican Party versus White. And the decision in that case is judicial candidates could talk about issues and they could say what their opinion was on them, but they couldn't commit. They still couldn't commit to decide them in a particular way, or at least that court didn't conclude that the Constitution gives them the right to do that. And so it's going to be a very, very interesting question about exactly what was said in the campaign and how was it worded. I do note that Judge Protasiewicz did say that she was going to recuse herself from cases involving the Democratic Party, but not redistricting. I don't know what principle allows you to draw a distinction between that, because if the point is that you think you can't hold the balance, true, because of all the money that you got from the Democratic Party, then how can you possibly sit on the very case which is most important to the Democratic Party, which would be an attempt to redo redistricting? I'm interested in seeing what the explanation for that is.
Is it true that judges decide for themselves whether to recuse themselves? Is there any review of that or any appeal of their decision if they just, again, falsely or erroneously refuse to recuse when they have an obvious conflict?
Yeah, so the United States Supreme Court has said that the United States Supreme Court traditionally, the justices make individual decisions whether to recuse themselves. And sometimes they'll just recuse themselves and they won't say why. This issue came up before the Wisconsin Supreme Court in some decisions involving former Justice Gableman. And the court wound up holding by a 4-3 vote that as a court, as a body, they wouldn't supervise a justice's decision to recuse himself or herself. That would be a decision that was left up to them. And so at least in terms of recourse to the court, as opposed to, to potential impeachment proceedings, before the Senate, that whole type of thing, which doesn't happen very often, this would be a decision for the individual justices.
There's been talk among state senators that, and other people that the state Senate could consider impeaching Janet. And I think it's based on those, if she refuses to recuse herself, is it your opinion that they would have a case to impeach her?
Well, I mean, I don't know what the case is yet, because I don't know what's happened and what they've done. I would have to say that, as probably as a legal matter, but also as a political matter, that, impeachment is a tool that should be wielded very, very carefully and with a great deal of reservations, because it tends to backfire. Voters don't like all of this squabbling about things that happened in the past. And, it certainly hurt the Republicans in the Clinton case. I don't think it helped the Democrats at all with the Trump impeachment. I think you have to be very, very careful about when you use that type of device. And it is intended to be used rarely. And I think that, what people have to keep, you have to keep their eyes on the main point here. And that is that they may be disappointed that the balance of power in the court changed in the April 23 election. But 2 years from now, the balance of power in the court is going to be up again. Justice Ann Walsh Bradley is up for re-election. Although she'll be 75 years old, she's announced that she is going to run for re-election, which means I think that she'll be one candidate, because basically sitting justices don't get denied the nomination. And but presumably there'll be somebody, some constitutional conservative that will run against her, and the balance of power in the court will be up for grabs again. And so I think, if you're somebody that wants to restore the court to what it was, you have to keep your eye on the big picture, not the short term. and conduct yourself accordingly. And people can debate about what that means. I've got my own opinions, but I always say that as a political consultant, I'm a really good lawyer. So
regarding abortion, I'd like your opinion. It sounds like I think Attorney General Call has filed a suit that's going to be, I think there's going to be arguments starting May 4th, I believe, that he's trying to get the 1849 law invalidated. I think by saying there's some other law that came on later that should supersede it. Do you have any thoughts on what his chances are of success on this? And
yeah, so my understanding that there are three things. Number one, Attorney General Call is not claiming that there is a state constitutional right to have an abortion. He's not arguing for a state version of Roe versus Wade. We could see that at some point. There is nothing in the state constitution that says anything about abortion. I am not aware of any neutral methodology that you could use to find a right to an abortion. The problem with Roe from the beginning, and I go back with Roe. I wrote my law review note on the constitutional basis of Roe versus Wade. That was in 1979. It really was never constitutional law. And if you look at the explanation that the Supreme Court gave for it, it's shockingly spare. And so don't know what this court would do, but he's not making that argument. What he's saying is two things. First of all, he's saying that the 1849 law is just too old. You just can't enforce a law from 1849. The problem with that is it's not really a legal thing. That law has been on the books. It's been amended. I don't think that you can just ignore it because it got passed a long time ago. Lots of laws got passed a long time ago. The better argument he has, and the one that I think the court will spend the most time on, is that during the pendency of Roe, when Roe was the law, the legislature passed a different statute that restricted abortion in ways that would be permitted by Roe. And so what he's arguing is that later statute implicitly repealed, and implicitly meaning it didn't do it directly, didn't say it was doing it, but it implicitly, without saying it, repealed the 1849 law. And so that this new law, which would have been permissible under Roe, is now the law that governs abortion in Wisconsin. And it basically establishes a Roe-like regime. It basically says, look, if you really want to do it, you can pretty much get an abortion up to the moment of birth. And so it doesn't say that, but that's essentially what it means if you look at the various provisions in it. Implicit repeal, the Wisconsin Supreme Court has long said that implied repeal is very, very disfavored. You very rarely should conclude that a law has been implicitly repealed. And in this instance, I think it's a tough argument to make from a legal perspective, because the reason that they passed a separate law rather than amend 4015, which was the law that was passed a long time ago, is that they wanted to keep that law in place in case Roe ever got overturned. That's why they did this odd thing of passing a separate law that governs the same thing. And so, if anything, the intent of the legislature was not to repeal 940.15, the old law. And so, I think that the court would really have to tie itself into knots to come to that conclusion. Might they come to that conclusion? Possible. But it's a tough, that too, I think is a pretty heavy lift for the Attorney General.
I think that they will tie themselves into whatever knot they need to in order to get abortion passed. I think that they will be very liberal with the law. So I think they'll try anything. But this is something new that
that decision is a matter of statutory construction. It would be tough to get the United States Supreme Court to look at that. You'd have to be fairly creative to figure out a way to do that.
Yeah. So you're saying they could do that, but that would likely force a federal review, and it would likely be struck down, but it's something
Well,
that they have to do.
I think it would be difficult to get federal review because what the court would be doing in that case, if it found implied repeal, is it would be saying what Wisconsin law means and what Wisconsin law is. And the United States Supreme Court doesn't, they don't decide what Wisconsin law is. The Wisconsin Supreme Court decides what it is. What the United States Supreme Court decides is what is whether Wisconsin law is consistent with federal law. And the only argument, just off the top of my head, and you could go in and you could make an argument that the United States Constitution, creates some right to personhood, at conception or at some point in fetal development. But, if you look at the opinion in Dobbs, I think it's pretty clear that the United States Supreme Court was saying, look, the U.S. Constitution doesn't have anything to say about abortion. This is a matter for the legislature. And so if the Wisconsin Supreme Court would do that, it might be that the later passed law is now the law regulating abortion in Wisconsin, but it would still be possible for the legislature to change it, although they would either have to get the governor to sign the law or they would have to override a veto by the governor.
What about, can you go through in more detail Act 10 and I guess just how you see the potential challenges to that and what the pushback is?
I have to be honest, I could never see any decent constitutional challenge to Act 10 because collective bargaining is not something that exists naturally. Collective bargaining is something that the legislature had to create. And what the legislature has to create, the legislature can take away. And there are a couple of different arguments that were made. The one that eventually was made, the principal one that was eventually made to the Wisconsin Supreme Court in the case that upheld Act 10 was that, well, this violates the freedom of association guaranteed by the Wisconsin Constitution. But the problem with that argument is it's just flat out false, because Act 10 does not prevent you from associating. It doesn't prevent you from forming a union. You can form a union and you can say, look, we're forming a union and anybody that wants to join the union, this is how you do it. This is what the dues are. What Act 10 did was it removed the privileges that are guaranteed by collective bargaining. And that is largely the obligation on the part of the state to negotiate with you. Because, if you think about it for a minute, you think about it in very fundamental terms. All of us have the right to form associations and petition our government, go to our government and say, you should raise taxes, you should lower taxes, this is what you should do. The government has no obligation to listen to us. It can ignore us. It can not do what we want. It can even refuse to talk to us about it. Collective bargaining grants public employee unions a special privilege when they deal with the government, because the government now has an obligation to bargain in good faith subject to arbitration. And that's not the right of association. That's a special privilege that was conferred by the legislature. Now, you may think it's a good privilege. You may like it. That's fine. But if the legislature has to grant you the statutory privilege, it's not a constitutional requirement, then the legislature can take it away. And the legislature did take it away. And I think did so in a perfectly proper manner. And if you look at the case that finally upheld Act 10, the final case, that was not a 4-3 decision. That was a 5-2 decision. Justice Crooks, who likes collective bargaining, he thinks that there should be public employee collective bargaining. He rethought that. He's passed away since then. He said, look, I think this is a bad law, but it's not unconstitutional. The legislature gets to do it. And so I'm not going to vote to strike it down because I can't, even though I wish they hadn't have done it.
Well, one big question that I get a lot, because I'm involved in the space of school boards, revolves around Title IX. And with
heard that.
Yeah. And so what does that mean for Wisconsin if the proposed changes to Title IX by the Biden administration, which right now they're just proposed and they're seeking comments, what would that mean for Wisconsin schools and universities if those proposed changes are enacted, which they very likely will be?
Well, a lot of odd things, a lot of things that 10 years ago we would not have thought were possible. And, you know, we hear from people like you all the time about some very odd things that happen in public schools. And, you know, the concern would be that these things would, people who wanted these changes to be made in public schools, things about access to locker rooms, access to the athletic teams, you know, whether you have to refer to somebody in a particular way, would all become a federal case. I think that would be very, very unfortunate. But the problem that we're going to see happening is that this is going to set Title IX against itself. Because imagine this, you know, Title IX was supposed to ensure that there would be access to the service and facilities of educational facilities that are receiving federal funds. Imagine a situation where, you know, you have young female students who now have a situation where their school is allowing boys, call them what you will, biological boys, trans boys, into the locker room. This is something that they will perceive, many of them will perceive anyway, as a very, very substantial violation of their privacy and perhaps putting them at risk. And so the question then is, well, isn't that the Title IX violation? Aren't these girls being denied on the, full access to these educational services because they are not being provided the private space that they as young females need? And so, you know, I think we're going to have a real interesting set of questions. Because to say that Title IX requires that itself raises the question of whether Title IX could be violated by allowing, you know, this type of situation, or you allow boys, you know, to participate on a girls' athletic team. Well, you know, the big thing that everybody has emphasized about Title IX, I think they overemphasize it. I think this would have happened anyway. Is the tremendous opening up of opportunities for young women to participate in athletics, and I think we all agree that that's a great thing. But if you're going to allow boys to participate on girls' teams, are you now going to be denying these young women the opportunity to fully participate in athletics? You know, have an opportunity to play and have an opportunity to be competitive and to win. And isn't that a Title IX violation? And
are these cases going before the Supreme Court right now?
Yeah, there are some cases that are wending their way up there.
Okay. So it's going to all end up in the hands of the Supreme Court at the end.
Yeah, but it'll be the U.S. Supreme Court that decides what Title IX requires and what it doesn't require. The Wisconsin Supreme Court can express an opinion on that. If a case is brought in state court, it can decide it, but that would always be subject to federal review. That would always be subject to United States Supreme Court review.
Okay.
I was curious the timing of all this and the process, and just, I guess, how fast do you think the left can, you know, take up some of these cases? What you think is going to come out of the chute first, and just where you sort of see the timing and what's going to happen, you know, first.
So here's sort of a little interesting twist. The Wisconsin Supreme Court has substantial discretion to take something that's called an original action. So, typically, the Wisconsin Supreme Court operates as an appellate court. So cases filed in the circuit court, it gets appealed to the Court of Appeals. There's a provision to bypass through the Wisconsin Supreme Court, but then it goes to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. It doesn't start in the Wisconsin Supreme Court. They don't conduct a trial. They don't hear evidence. They don't hear witnesses. Over the past, 6 or 7 years, we made very effective use of original actions because we identified cases in which there was no need for witnesses. There was no need for a trial because everybody agreed with the facts. Where the question was, what is the law? And we know that the Wisconsin Supreme Court is ultimately going to have to decide that question. So let's use an original action. The liberal left progressive wing of the court didn't like that, right? And so you'll go and you'll find a lot of opinions where they said, look, we shouldn't be doing this. We should let the case start in the trial court and work its way up. And Justice Hagedorn, although he sometimes approved original actions, he also expressed some hesitance and reluctance to do that. And so I think it's going to be difficult for these justices to reverse themselves and simply say that, well, now we're going to allow a bunch of original actions. And I understand that, people can be very, say, look, it's a political process. They're going to do whatever they have to do. But, I've been a lawyer for a long time, and it's very, very, courts, I think, see themselves under some obligation. It's sometimes very difficult for them to eat their words or to depart from conducting themselves in a way that lawyers conduct themselves. And so I think these cases are going to have to start in the circuit court. They're going to have to work their way up, and that's going to take time.
Before we continue, Jim, can you send Michelle the link?
Yep.
I think let's bring Michelle in. She might have a couple questions for Rick as well.
Yep, I just resent it to her. I've sent it earlier tonight. She's not getting it. We're having some technical issues, so hopefully she'll be joining us shortly. Yeah.
It'll just be nice to hear from her, and maybe we bring her in at this point. She was our surprise guest.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Scarlett.
I just had a question about what you see for 2023, 2024 as far as parental rights. I know I've worked with Will testifying several times before the Assembly and the State Senate regarding parental rights in education. We know that we can go ahead and try and pass that again, and Evers will most likely not sign it. So while those endeavors I think are still worthwhile, and I plan to do that again, what can we expect? What can we do? What can we accomplish as far as parental rights? I know that it was on April 19th, so just yesterday, Luke Berg just testified you were working with ADF on a big case in Kettle Moraine regarding parental rights.
Yeah, he argued a motion for summary judgment in the circuit court in a case that we brought involving the Kettle Moraine School District. We have another one pending that involves the Madison School District. And the issue there is that both the United States Supreme Court and the Wisconsin Supreme Court have said that the United States and Wisconsin constitutions, respectively, do create a right in parents to control and direct the education and upbringing of their students, of their children. And it's not absolute, but it's strong. I think it's particularly strong in Wisconsin. And so that is a situation where no matter what the legislature has passed, it is possible to make an argument that the Wisconsin Constitution and the United States Constitution, for that matter, does not permit, for example, and the issues in those cases were children to socially transition to another gender without the involvement and participation of their parents. I think that's an extremely strong argument. And that is a situation where there even if the Wisconsin Supreme Court were ultimately to rule against it, there's a federal issue there because the United States Constitution grants these rights as well.
And yeah, and then I guess that would parallel with school choice. I'm thinking as states all over the country, red states at least, are passing so much school choice legislation that's even much better than Wisconsin because they're ESA accounts, and there's no limits as far as income, and the universal, even in Florida and a few other states. I wonder. I'm thinking that we may not actually see a challenge to the Wisconsin school choice program because that could backfire on those that oppose school choice, as we do have a more conservative Supreme Court, and maybe they would be concerned that there would be an affirmation of school choice that would.
Right. So this is where we talked a little while about, I think the traditional challenge that has been made to choice programs has basically been the involvement of religious schools. I think now that's after Espinosa and Carson, that Malkin, that's very, very difficult. I think that, if I sit there and I put on, my hat where I try to think, what kind of crazy and creative theory that I can think of. I can think of some that could be pursued. I don't think any of them are very, very good. The other problem that you have, I think, when you're trying to anticipate what will happen in school choice is that school choice, like, virtually any government program, it develops a constituency. Mm-hmm. And so there are a lot of people who really like school choice and they use it. And they ain't all Republicans, right? I mean, a lot of them are, people who would normally, vote for Democrats or, Democrat-aligned candidates, in the city of Milwaukee, where the choice program is huge. And I don't know that those voters will take well to having the idea that the choice program would be taken away from them.
I guess my personal belief is that probably the biggest thing conservatives have going for them right now, other than, which is really important, is the fact that the Democrats always overplay their hand. So, true. I think the state Supreme Court race, perhaps you could argue it was perhaps a mandate on abortion. Like, I'm pro-life. I don't even believe in exceptions for rape. I know I'm an anomaly on that, front, but, I admit that most people in Wisconsin are not where I'm at, according to the polls. So, I think especially when it comes to younger voters, perhaps this was, a mandate on abortion. But if this new liberal controlled court takes that and expands it to things like Act 10, and then people's property taxes go up, or expand it, to issues relating to police powers, and restricting the rights of police and expanding the rights of criminal defendants. If they take it to mean that they think they have some mystical fictional mandate to roll back gun rights and the Second Amendment, if they apply it, to redistricting, and popular congressmen suddenly find themselves drawn out of office, I think it's going to be a whole different story. And I think they would do that at their own peril. So the left always does this. They overplay their hand. They misread what the voters' intent really is. And I think we're going to see that play out here in record speed.
Well, you have some precedent for that. So, in
Michelle.
Hey.
Sorry to interrupt you, Rick. Yeah, we're welcoming.
Sorry, Rick.
Yeah.
It was Adam and Michelle.
Former
we're
state
excited to have
representative.
Michelle Lichman's pause.
Yeah, former state representative Michelle Lichman's joining us here. So welcome, Michelle.
Hello.
Okay. Go ahead, Rick.
Continue on, Rick.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Jessica, that there's precedent for that. That's what happened when, there was a deal cut in about 20 years ago for Diane Sykes to get appointed to the Seventh Circuit. She's been a wonderful Seventh Circuit judge. And then Louis Butler took her place on the Wisconsin Supreme Court after she had defeated Butler a couple years before that for her seat on the court. And there was this extraordinary term in 2004, 2005, where they did just that. They overreached. It wasn't on some of the issues that you mentioned. Obviously, there were different issues back then, but it had to do with some criminal cases and some liability cases, things like that. And there was a backlash against that. And I remember because I was part of that backlash. And that led to the election of Annette Ziegler and then Michael Gableman, and the court flipped. And so it's you're saying that it's going to happen again. I would say that, from your lips to God's ear, but I also would remind everybody that it's happened before, right? And I suspect that's what you had in mind when you made those comments.
Yeah, I remember that all as well with Louis Butler and so forth. And could you explain the concept of new federalism and what they were trying to do with all of that back? I think it was around that time frame I started hearing people talking about that.
Well, so the new federalism is a term that's used in a couple of different ways, but the way it was being used then was that so there are provisions in both the U.S. Constitution and the Wisconsin Constitution that are very similar. And most of the time, these provisions, which are sometimes called cognate provisions, but these similar provisions, that's a simpler word, are usually interpreted by the Wisconsin Supreme Court in lockstep with the U.S. Supreme Court. That is, the protection against unreasonable searches and seizures in the United States Constitution is interpreted the same way as the one in the Wisconsin Constitution. In the late 1970s, then Justice William Brennan on the U.S. Supreme Court became concerned that the U.S. Supreme Court was getting to be too conservative. And he said, look, state Supreme Court should now interpret these similar provisions to provide more rights to people, although it was not every kind of right. It was the kind of rights that he liked. And he called that the new federalism. And that would be the idea that the Wisconsin state Supreme Courts can depart from the U.S. Supreme Court. As a matter of law, it's absolutely true. As long as the Wisconsin Supreme Court interpretation doesn't violate federal law, it can do it. And so, for example, Wisconsin has always provided more robust protection for religious freedom than the U.S. Supreme Court, not always, but really over the past almost 30 years. And it can do it. It usually doesn't do it, but it can do it. And there was some argument there that, they should interpret the Equal Protection Clause in a way that allowed certain provisions, certain legislative acts to be struck down. That argument was made in connection with caps on non-economic damages for medical malpractice. And we could see that argument coming back. It's a little bit different now. That used to be seen as kind of a left liberal progressive argument. Now I think both sides kind of make it sometimes.
Michelle, what questions do you have for Rick?
Well, I wanted to say, first of all, Rick, you're awesome with everything that you do.
Uh-oh, are we all frozen? Oh no, what happened?
Are we? No.
Where'd everyone go?
Yeah.
I'm fine. I can hear.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we're fine, Jessica.
Maybe
It's just
I'm
your
just
internet.
frozen.
But I wanted to elaborate a little bit on something you just said.
My golden retriever shares your opinion.
Are we frozen?
No.
I was,
No.
I don't know. I think maybe it was me. All of a sudden everyone was frozen and then gone. And then, I don't know. It might just be on my end.
No,
No.
looking at that too. So maybe, I don't know. Should I talk?
Yeah.
Yeah,
go
you,
ahead,
yeah,
Michelle, we
I
can
can
hear
hear
you.
you now.
Yeah.
But when you had asked Rick about the Democrats overstepping, and I think he said they have a history of doing that, I just wanted to remind everyone how we got the Republicans to take over the governor's house, the assembly, and the Senate in 2010. And that was because the Democrats in Congress way overstepped their boundaries and what Americans wanted them to do, especially with Obamacare. They also went too far in the state of Wisconsin with way too many regulations, and they spent far too much money, which again brought in a new class of conservatives in 2010. So although this is a hard period we're going through right now, I think that we should expect the Democrats to try to do too much that's going to make the normal average person feel very uncomfortable. And I think we're going to have a good chance to come back even stronger in 2 more years.
That's what I think what's happening in education. They are so overstepping their bounds in education and in the culture wars. They are going way too far. And my husband, I was on Vicki McKenna's show today for a little while. My husband's listening and he's like, I just can't believe this is happening. I pinch myself and think, how am I living in a world where I have 4 daughters and 2 of them play sports, and I have a lot that I am very concerned about, especially my 14-year-old. And, you know, we're having to have some tough conversations and wonder what we're going to do about certain things. I think they're going so far that this is going to snap back. This is going to rebound on them. This woke agenda is just, it's just, you know, it's clown world.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, if you were sitting and you were having this conversation in, 2007, 2008, and that was a very gloomy time for conservatives. I mean, I think that Newsweek or something, they had the cover of Newsweek said, is conservatism dead? I mean, we're all socialists now. All of that stuff was being said, and it turned around awfully quickly. And, this is one of the reasons why I always tell people, and sometimes I tell conservatives, is that, the reason the process is important and the reason that we should care about that, even if we think we can get what we want, is that there are no permanent victories in politics.
Yes.
And, when we went through we did a lot of COVID litigation. And all of our COVID litigation was basically based upon how you make a decision. I mean, it wasn't about what the decision should be. It should be how you make it. And what I used to, say to our friends on the left is, look, there will be a governor someday that you don't like. I guarantee it. And you will not want to give them unfettered power, because that is not the way that our system is made up. And so we stay true to principle. And I understand that, this may be a challenging couple of years, but we have to stay the course.
Rick, I think your message is incredibly important for conservatives to hear right now, because I think, the margin of the Supreme Court race was demoralizing for a lot of people. When Jim and I were speaking at an event in Racine County yesterday, one message we wanted to impart is, at least when it comes to us, we will simply not give up, right? Like, we're going to keep fighting. And you're right. I mean, we've both been around this long enough to know the pendulum swings back. Sometimes it can swing back really, really quickly. And so I really appreciate the message that you're giving and how important it is to stick to tried and true principles and not, overreach back, in reaction to what they do.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, though, that being said, how worried are you about all of this? Like, how big of a deal was that victory for the left in, April?
Well, I mean, I've always said that there are ways in which the Wisconsin Supreme Court elections are more important than the election for governor, and people should take them very, very seriously. And somehow they take them more seriously than they used to, but still, you don't get the kind of turnout, you don't get the type of commitment. I think you need that kind of turnout. You need that type of commitment, because particularly if you've got a majority which is on the sort of the legal left, the key, the sort of the key guiding principle of the legal left, which was, that was all there was when I was in law school. But the key guiding principle is that the law is uncertain, and we should not be formalistic about the law, and we should just try to decide cases in a way which is right. And when you give judges that type of power, all sorts of things can happen. And you're absolutely right, Jessica. There's been backlash against that. There was backlash against the United States Supreme Court. It led to the formation of the Federalist Society. It led to what has really been a revolution in the conservative legal movement. It's much more powerful, much more intellectual, much more coherent than it used to be. You see that now in the composition of the United States Supreme Court. And you may see it here, but the problem is that you have to make that happen. You can't sit back and hope that it will happen. And so, I would say to people that are tempted to give up, go online, find Winston Churchill's speech about fighting on the beaches and never surrendering. Read that speech, and then ask yourself again if you think it's appropriate for you to surrender. It's not.
And I love the message that you're giving, but I do worry about what's happening in a lot of our top, most prestigious law schools where free speech and, free thought and, we're seeing on these campuses, like some of the things that are happening the more, I think it's a very small group, but a very vocal group of very woke students with a few more of these very far left progressive law school professors where they refuse to they don't even want to hear different opinions. And they just have, this isn't the old left. This isn't the old liberal. I back in the day when I was in college, you could debate with liberals and you could walk away still friends. I think it's a little harder now, though not impossible. I don't believe that. I think the majority of normal people, they want a return to normalcy. But what do you think about what's happening in law schools right now and kind of the next upcoming lawyers and the new thinkers and the millennials?
I think we just lost Rick.
Oh no.
We'll see. He's telling Jeff, hopefully he'll be able to come back on and join us.
I hope he will. I really want to.
Yeah.
He's really an interesting person. I'm really glad that we invited him on. First of all, I've admired him for years, and he used to have a blog back in the day, and he's a true intellectual. Yeah. And I feel actually more confident after listening to him.
I do. And I wanted him to talk about the Will's Preserving Democracy project. They have a webinar next week. And if anyone listening is interested, this is a free webinar, register online. And I wanted to hear what Will is attempting to do. It's very positive, and I think he's given us some hints of the direction they're trying to go in our talk today, where we can't be so doom and gloom. And I'm talking to myself, sometimes we get caught in this very doomsday echo chamber, and you just want to move to Montana. And
well, we even caught ourselves last night like that. Jessica and I kind of, we talk a lot and we're in our own echo chamber, and it was kind of nice to get that event yesterday. And there was so much enthusiasm and, a lot of positive talk. Michelle, you were there and you kind of heard it. And I got to tell you, I walked out of there like much more renewed and feeling good about it rather than the doom and gloom that I was feeling before.
I'm going to send you the link. Someone wants links. So I'm going to send you the link, Jim, to this webinar.
Michelle, I'm curious, I guess what your take is just on where conservatives go from here. Like what happens next and how demoralized should we all be?
It's a challenge, isn't it? We put in so much time and effort in your heart, and every day you're working to elect someone that you think is the right person for the position, and then they lose, and they don't just lose by a little bit, they lose by a lot. And you have to sit back and say, oh my goodness, what happened? And this is after we're licking our wounds from last November. So we're still not fully recovered from losing. We do have to look at a few bright spots. I think we can say that so much of what just happened does depend on the candidates. And I think we need to do a better job as conservatives when selecting our candidates. So often we look for the perfect. Like, we would rather have someone be perfect and 100% on the issues than win sometimes. And I think we need to have a deep conversation with ourselves that just because someone believes in exceptions for abortion, it's okay, because that's where most of the public is. And if we want to win again, we need to accept that someone might disagree with us on just a few issues. But just remembering, again, I came in with the class of 2010. We were very demoralized after Obama was elected. But the Tea Party movement started because the Democrats overstepped so much, because they can't help themselves. And as Scarlett was talking about with our schools, who in a million years would have thought that that they're talking in California right now about taking away children from parents because they won't let their children transition at age 10.
Well, what about
ridiculous?
In California, if a parent, like, I go to school board meetings and I criticize my school board members, my superintendent. In California, if I were to go before my school board and criticize their policy, if I don't like their policy on critical race theory, or I don't like their gender inclusion policy, that could be a misdemeanor. I could be arrested. That they're considering that a misdemeanor. That is something that they are arguing right now in the California Assembly. It's so far, like, just I have friends. There's Moms for Liberty in California, but I have other friends that are conservatives in California, and boy, like, they are warriors. They are really warriors. What they face, and they're homeschooling. I mean, they have homeschooling pods, and they are trying to make it work. But I think but for the grace of God go we. And that's why we have to be really vigilant and appreciative of what we have here in Wisconsin. And just like you said, Michelle, it could be worse. It could be a lot worse. So I also think we have to use the power that we have and talk to, we do have both houses. And I think we have to have do some constructive work with our elected representatives, not yelling at them, screaming at them, but how can we work together, show up, drive to Madison, show up, because the left sure does. Make those calls, send those emails, because the left sure does. So stop being a keyboard warrior. You have to do more than that.
But you also need to say thank you once in a while when they do good things, not just to our legislators, but to Jim and Jessica. Yep. Thank you for being our voice out there. Thank you for standing up, against the liberal mainstream media that we hear from every single day. And we have very, very strong conservative legislators that are fighting for the right thing. And they are stopping Tony Evers. I mean, I think we need to understand what his budget would have done to the state of Wisconsin if we would not have had the strong conservative leadership that we have that said, forget that budget. We are not going to raise taxes. We are not going to add additional rules and regulations on our citizens. We're going to start over and create a conservative budget, one that will increase some spending. So hopefully Tony Evers is willing to sign it. But we have people fighting for us every day. So we need to tell them thank you once in a while, too.
That's a good point. That really is a good point, to say good job, thank you. I appreciate what you've done. I appreciate that you've stuck your neck out. Thank you to Jim and Jessica for all the hard work they have done. And I had behind the scenes look at everything they had done during the Supreme Court race, and even in November as well, trying to actual news out there, trying to be actual journalists and tell the truth. And, and I think it's made a difference. And even
Thank you.
It has. It's made a huge difference, and there's elected leaders that they're exposed, and I think that all in karma, all of this comes back, and good karma, bad karma, and you guys have planted seeds that will flourish. You will see. You don't see it right now, but those seeds that you all have been planting, they are going to bloom. You don't know who you're influencing. You don't know what future legislator, what future DA who reads your work and listens, how that's going to influence them down the road. So, you never know how you're affecting people in the positive way.
I mean, I would say the same to you, Scarlett. And one reason I wanted to be on podcast with you is I admire all the work you do. I think you're ferocious. I think you're passionate. You really care about your community and children. And you do this all just for free. You know what I mean? Like, there's no profit motive. I admire that. Like, that's so rare in society today. Jim and I were talking about, we don't particularly like the warring political operative nonsense, and it's like paid people going from carnival to carnival is kind of how I see it. But then in the midst of all that, there's people like you, and other people that we have met who like actually truly are doing this for the right reason and because they care about ideas and issues and causes. And that's refreshing. And when it comes to Michelle, I'm excited to have your voice back in the public square. I think it's been needed for quite some time. And I can certainly say that it can be difficult sometimes being a conservative female in this public square. And I think it's going to be exciting to see your ideas and what you have to offer to this conversation. So
I'm following you on Twitter now, Michelle.
Thank you.
I'm glad you're back in the fight.
Yeah,
Michelle,
this time our side will win.
Maybe this would be a good time. Maybe because there may be a lot of people that aren't familiar with who Michelle is. Michelle, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I mean, I go back. I was the kid who brought the 10-week-old unborn baby to school in 4th grade to tell people that's really a baby. So I've kind of been in this fight my entire life. I was really active with the county parties, county party chairman in Winnebago and blah, blah, blah. And then in 2010, my state legislator was running for Congress. And so the seat opened up. And so I had enough. I was one of those few candidates who said I wanted parity between public and private employee benefits on my campaign literature. So when Act 10 came about, I can say I was part of the reason why we did that. But I ran. I had a hard time doing that job and being a single mom. I think women have an extra challenge when you're elected because in the night I decided that I wasn't going to run again. I was at a chamber event being yelled at by teachers. This was shortly after Act 10 was passed that year. And I was supposed to be registering my son for high school classes. And I sat there and thought, what am I doing? So I left the public scene that way, but then I was on Charlie Sykes' show for a number of years and did talk radio for a while. But you can get beaten down, and Jessica and I have had this conversation before. When you are out there, the haters come out. People just want to tear you apart and take you down. And when the Democrats do that, you just kind of get used to it. Your skin gets a little thick and you can take it. But more recently, it's been our own side. And I've really seen that start up after Donald Trump came around on the scene in 2016. When the man can tell a woman she has a dog face, and I would have washed my son's mouth out with soap, but instead that was kind of acceptable behavior from a presidential candidate. I think that just lowered the standards for how we treat each other. And so for women, and I know the 2 women here tonight have been through this as well, it just becomes more of a challenge to put yourself out there. But we need to hear from women. We need our voices heard. We have a different perspective than men, especially when it comes to our children and protecting them and education. I think we have a different view on that a little bit more. And we sometimes can present a better message. So, and connect again with the women voters that are out there that we're losing in droves because of some of our male candidates. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Yes, what you're saying is 100% right. There needs to be more female conservatives in Wisconsin. There needs to be a bigger presence. Having a lot of friends in Florida, seeing that women are like taking over the conservative space in a lot of states. And it's awesome to see. I mean, Kim Reynolds in Iowa, I mean, she's a rock star. She doesn't get talked about a lot because, Ron DeSantis is so amazing, but it has done just about everything that Ron DeSantis has done. It's maybe without as much fanfare. The first time I noticed her, there was a book that she started to read aloud to a reporter that was questioning, like, well, why are you opposing this book? Are you a book banner? So she said, oh, okay, well, let me read this. And in her sweet voice, she starts reading this book out loud. And the reporter's just shocked. And she just, and that was the first time I saw her in this light. Like, yeah, she's a nice lady, but you know what? Like, she's tough. And what she did when she tried to get school choice through and 3 Republicans would not sign on to it, and that she primaried them and got different Republicans. And then now she's passed universal school choice in Iowa. Like, that's a strong woman who is still feminine, who is still a mother, but that is the kind of image that we want to project as conservatism, but also to our daughters. And it's what I'm trying to, and Jessica, I know you have a gorgeous, beautiful daughter, that you're trying to project strength, but also femininity, that you can still be a woman, you can still be soft, and strong. And that's what makes us unique and special.
I think that there's a lot of incredible conservative women, always have been, certainly in politics, certainly in the county party trenches. When we go to these county party events, I feel like a lot of conservative women are, the ones leading the charge in these county levels. But I do think in the media space, there aren't that many visible conservative women who have a voice. I do think, now I don't have any respect for Charlie Sykes anymore at all. I think he's a traitor. But back in the day, he did elevate the voices of conservative women. So he did it with me. I was just a person at the Journal Sentinel, and he called and said, will you go on my TV show, as did Mark Belling. And he mentored me intellectually in the early days before he, obviously went off the deep end. Michelle, he put you on his show. Rebecca Clayfish, he had on his show. So I do think he played a role, or he understood. He had some Iron Lady Award where he would give to.
It was the right women. Do you remember when he started that?
Right.
Without Charlie, Rebecca never would have run for lieutenant governor. He was the one who propelled her to, it gave her the microphone so that she actually could be on par with the other candidates, because we all thought that was going to be a different male running mate for Scott Walker in 2010.
Brett Davis.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember that. Yeah. Yep. People forget she was the anti-establishment candidate, the complete underdog. I guess, thinking back to how, like, in his glory days, like, Charlie did do that. I know that Jim and I want to use this podcast in part, like, to amplify, to use a word the left loves, the voices of conservative women, and bring them not out of the shadows, but like into the media space. Because I think if we're going to win back, for example, the Wow County women, some of whom have left the party, look at the numbers, right? There's a massive gender gap in April in the Supreme Court race. If we're going to reach those women, we need some female ambassadors. Now, I'm not denigrating men. I love conservative men, and we obviously need them active and, engaged in the media space too. But I just think this podcast is cool because look at all the female voices that we're hearing from. I mean, it just different voices. And then we also had Orlando Owens, and we had Ed Delgado. And I'm kind of excited about all of these different conservative voices that, you know, we're bringing in to the public square.
Elevating minorities who are conservative too, and that's something that I've thought for a long time. We've got some really great conservative voices that are in the Hispanic and the Black community, and you know, in this world, in this space where identity politics, like, we have to be real, like, where that's a real thing. I know that I have something to say because of my background, because of the way that I grew up, and there's something that I can add that's different. There's something that Orlando can add that's different, that Ed Delgado can add that's different, that Cindy Warner can add that's different, you know, and the more that we can amplify those voices, the more that they'll come over and I think they are in such alignment with us on so many ways, that if they could just see themselves in the party, we would have better luck. And I think that's what you've seen in Florida, that Hispanics can see themselves in the Republican Party. They are now, 50%, and that number is growing. They're identifying as a Ron DeSantis Republican. They are excited to be in the conservative party, and it's a different. Things change, and you know, I was active in the Tea Party movement for a reason, but I was back then, just my kids were all really young, but I was taking them to Madison, and we were all holding signs we had a blast. I have pictures of my babies like holding signs, you know, Atlas is shrugging, and that was their first little experience into politics. But I think we need to get back there again. 2020 election, COVID, there's just a weight we have not yet lifted. I'm nervous about the 2024 primary that actually starts in Milwaukee in 2023? In August 2023, we're going to have the first primary debate right here in Milwaukee. We're going to be front and center to the big show. So I think as a party, we need to come together, get our act together, and unify. And I'm looking forward to. I think there's a lot of great things coming our way in Wisconsin, though. You know, I think that just again, there just can't be such. It's easy to be resentful, but just to try to move forward and move past everything.
Well, Michelle hit on something important, which is that, you know, the conservative movement is divided. Now, I personally don't believe the fringe elements of it are that big in number, but they're loud. They're young enough that they understand social media. And so they can sort of seem like they're more vocal or more relevant or bigger in numbers than I think they are. But they're destructive. They are loud. They push people out of the party. They attack people. You know, they've decided, I guess, that if you're a little old lady who sits at the county fair at a booth for your county party, that you're the establishment and somehow the villain, somehow the person that we need to attack. They spend more time attacking our legislative leaders, our political candidates, our party chairmen, you know, our pundits like me or Michelle or Scarlett or Jim, than they do the left. And I'm going to come out and say it that I've absolutely had it. I've had it with that fringe element of the party. I'm not standing for it anymore. I'm not taking it. I'm not going to be silent about it. The conservative movement needs to unite and needs to clean house. And these fringe people that are going to come and they're going to call people names, they're going to be trolls, they're going to spend their energy attacking our people, need to go. That's it. They're out.
Amen.
Because the liberal media latches on to the most extreme, most fringy element of our movement. and they extrapolate it on everybody else, and they extrapolate it onto our candidates, and they sync them. And I am done with it. And so I think this also we need to move forward. We need to be optimistic. We need to not give up, but there needs to be a reckoning too.
So the question I have is, how do we do that? And this is a very timely conversation because today it's been a pretty rough day. And we've talked about that. And you know what? We can take the hits from the left. I expect it. But these hits that we've been taking from a handful of these, the self-proclaimed conservatives, are so much more horrific and vile than the left has ever thrown at us, especially Jessica. And, we are sitting right here trying to figure out, how do we handle this as conservatives in the day of social media. Michelle, I know you've been a target of attacks too. What kind of strategy do we work on moving forward to get rid of these people, get them out of here?
I think you guys are onto something, and it was Jessica that reiterated this just the other day, that we can't give them a platform, because that's what they want. They want people to see their snide remark, and they want people to like that, and they want people to retweet it. So I think we just have to ignore them, and we have to remind everyone that the only way we can win is by getting the majority. We can't split ourselves up. We can't talk about how so-and-so is not perfect, or this person did something wrong and that. If we don't coalesce, we will continue to lose. And I think we have to point out, and not by name, but point out the people that are divisive. Point out the people who say, because you're not 100% perfect, we're going to lose. So I think part of it is we have to ignore that group. We cannot amplify them. We can't give them a microphone anymore, because it's also showing our normal people that we have the crazies out there, and then they move away. They don't want to be involved. We've lost so many donors that were normal Republicans. We lost average suburban women because we've got part of our party that is so angry, and they just are so divisive, and they're just evil at times. Many, one locally actually, just want to call her out. I think she's sitting in her basement right now collecting disability and food stamps for that matter. And we've got people like that who are criticizing other people for trying to do the right thing, because we might not agree on absolutely everything. And that's wrong. But I also think this is going to change, because I do think the Democrats are going to go so far, as they always do when they gain power. They are going to go so far, and those people in the middle, especially a lot of the women who wanted some abortion, not 9 months of abortion, but a little bit, just in case their daughter was pregnant or their friend was raped or whatever it might happen to be. The women that kind of sway back and forth, when the left goes so far, if we have a candidate that we can all coalesce behind, those people are going to come back. So I do think we have to make sure that we are looking for solid candidates right now, people that are willing to work really, really hard, and that we make sure that we nominate someone for president who is going to bring us all together, not be more divisive. Because if we have that cheerleader at the top, I honestly believe that people down, on the grassroots are going to come back, and they're going to say, yeah, we need to follow that person because we really want what's best for America.
I've spent the last week being called a prostitute on a podcast that pretends it's conservative, being called ugly by Facebook trolls who create and then replicate again anonymous profiles to do it. I have had the chairwoman of the Waukesha County Republican Women, the county I live in, applaud publicly a podcast that called me a prostitute and used ethnic slurs to refer to Jim, couching it in pseudonyms. But let me tell you that every single person that's listened to it believes that was about Jim and I. And I'm done. I'm telling you right now that I am done. I'm done. and I will call these people out, and I am done hiding who they are. Done.
One thing that I've said over and over, I'm not here to be somebody. I'm here to do something. And I think that there are folks that want to be somebody, and they're less concerned about doing something. I'm here to win. I've said this over when I'm talking to Brian Shimming, like, I'm here to win. I want to win. How do we win?
We start by weeding out the destructive people that sit around on Twitter and they trash the people that are out there doing the goddamn hard work. I've had it. Yeah. I've had it with the trashing of Robin Voss. I'm sorry, Michelle, because you're sitting here, but I'm done with that. I am done with it. To use one example of what I'm talking about, he has endured so much vitriol, so much harassment. It makes what I've been going through the past week look like nothing, what he's endured. And he doesn't deserve it. You know why? Because he's a conservative. Because his CPAC rating is
96%.
One of the most conservative ratings in the state's history. Because a former legislator I know said that he is the most conservative legislator that he has ever worked with. And yet we've got elements of people, I don't know where they came from, who think that they're somehow conservative and they're somehow championing conservative values, who are spending their energy and their time beating up the most conservative speaker in the assembly that we have ever had, and I'm done with it. And now because I dare to say that, and I will say it 100 more times, they're coming for me. They're calling me a prostitute. They're calling me ugly. They're saying I'm secretly, some secret ugly person. And I'm done with that too. I've had it. And then there's these people, they sit on Twitter and they get in the head of our party chairman, Brian Shimming, who is one of the most fundamentally decent and honest and hardworking people this movement has ever seen.
Yeah.
And he's out there and he's working himself to the absolute bone for this party. And then he has to turn around and he's being trashed by people. I'll name them, like Ian Jordan, whoever that is. These people have 10 followers, and yet they're all over social media. They're claiming they're the voice of conservatives. No, guess what? This podcast is going to start being the voice of conservatives. And we're going to start to isolate and shun people that are destructive forces like that, whether it's within county parties or it's on social media. And I'm going to call them out by name. By name.
But do we want to call them out by name, Jessica? But that's my concern. Do we want to?
Badger State Resistance called me a prostitute, couched as a fake name. But everybody who has listened to it believes they were talking about me. And yes, I'm calling that out.
I don't even know what Badger State Resistance is. I honestly never heard of them until you just said it right now. So just, and I'm pretty concerned.
And if anyone sees any of their posts, sees any of their tweets, sees any of their stuff, I would encourage you to unlike it, ignore it, and give it no credibility. Because if that is what they're going to say about a conservative woman, they don't deserve your time, your energy. And you know what? I trust the good sense and decency of 99% of conservatives in this state, that when they hear what people like that are doing to our own, they will shun them. They won't go on their show. They won't friend their page. They won't like it. Because I'm done. I am done. I've taken this for 20 years from the left. I have taken the hardest shots anyone in this state on the conservative side has ever taken from the liberal media. I dare you to find another conservative in this state that has taken harder hits from the liberal media. But I am telling you right now that I will not take it from our side. I'm done. And if people don't like it, too bad.
Okay.
I'm just I'm just
Don't show that one.
I'm sorry, I didn't even know. I was
Don't show her.
other ones. Yeah, I didn't see that.
Okay.
But what I'm just saying, there is so much positive comments to what you're saying, Jessica. Here's another. We love you. I think that I never heard of Badger State resistance. I do wonder. I don't know, folks who can't see, anyone who would call you guys corporate shills. It's like a joke. It's fun. I know it must hurt you. So it hurts, but it's so silly. It's so the opposite of what is true. You don't make any money from this. You give so much of yourselves, and you're constantly on the air on 1130 WISN. Your articles I hear every day. Every time I turn on 1130, oh, Wisconsin right now. You're constantly quoted from. So I think for Jessica, listen, Jim is right. Don't punch down. Don't punch down. Don't give them the time.
I don't think Jessica's going anywhere. I don't think Jessica's going to hide from this at all. But this does, the personal attacks have to stop. I just saw someone said, Voss is a traitor. Well, I would like them to back up some of those statements, right? Tell me when. Give me one example of when Robin Voss voted with the Democrats and voted against Republicans. I just want one example of where he was a liberal. So, Trump called him a rhino. And you all know the rhino forever has been a Republican in name only. That's what that means. But for Trump somehow meant a rhino is someone who disagrees with him. So when people are using the word rhino, they actually need to know what the correct definition is. And it's someone who's not voting or acting like a Republican. You cannot find someone who works stronger or more with the Republican principles than Speaker Robin Voss. He is a one person standing up against Tony Evers. He is smarter than anyone else in the assembly. He catches them at their own, or he beats them at their own game on a regular basis. But, we've got this group of people out there that just, they call him a traitor. I would just like them to give me an example of one.
They can't, Michelle. They can't.
Yeah. Let's
because
go ahead.
he's not.
It's this guy named the Meat Popsicle. Go ahead. You're the one that made the accusation.
Yeah.
Why don't you go ahead and tell us? Go ahead and comment on what he's done, on why Robin Voss is a traitor.
I would like
he was right not to decertify the election, by the way. That would have been the end of Republicanism in Wisconsin, and it's unconstitutional. And if we're going to stand for and say we stand for the Constitution, then we sure as heck better stand for it now. Robin Voss was right on decertification of the election. It can't be done. The founding fathers understood that we don't want constantly destabilized government. So they said once the Electoral College votes, the way to remove a president constitutionally is through the impeachment process. Otherwise, you would have constant topsy-turvy destabilization of our electoral process. I go back to what Rick Esenberg said, where he said we have to rely on our principles, especially when the going gets tough, especially when we don't have power in certain ways, because the left can turn around, they can wield on us whatever we wield on them. And so had Robin decertified the election or made a move to do that, I mean, imagine if the left tried to decertify elections because they didn't like our presidents. It just wasn't, first of all, it just wasn't the right way to do it. It wasn't legally possible. It wasn't constitutionally possible. And people just need to stop. They need to stop. If that's the best they have against Robin Voss, I mean, just stop.
I would really like to point out this week that former President Trump and even Don Jr. had said, hey, as this first successful boycott of Bud Light, like this is like a huge win for conservatives where we have cost them close to $6 billion in a loss in sales by boycotting them, for putting Dylan Mulvaney as their spokesperson. In the middle of this win, to have Donald Trump Jr. and Donald Trump say, "Oh, let's lay off Bud Light because they donated to us, or they donate to Republicans." What is more establishment than that? And while Ron DeSantis is going to war with Walt Disney and proving how conservatives can bring the fight to the left, how you can take these woke corporations and make them bend to your will, and show we've got the power and we're going to use it. In the midst of winning, then you've got Donald Trump saying, "Oh, I like Disney, leave Disney alone." What is more establishment than that? So for those, I thought, what irony that just to be against Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump is saying things that are going to hurt him in the end in the primary. When very conservative, very pro-Trump people are like, what's he doing? Why is he defending Bud Light? Why is he defending Disney? Why is he attacking Ron DeSantis harder than he attacks Joe Biden? What's happened? So what has been Ron DeSantis's response? I sent you the Never Back Down. And if you could figure out how to play it, Jim, it's a short clip, but give people something to aspire to. I know I have kids that are 24, 21. They want something to believe in. They are sick of all of this. They don't want anything to do with politics. We have got to be joyful warriors more. We have got to be for something. We've got to show what conservatism is, not just that we're against this and we're against that and we hate this and we're angry and mad about that and you cheated, but what we're for. Like if we're empowered, the good things that we'll do, the prosperity that you'll see, a renaissance of free thought and free expression, and that we truly want to live and let live, but the left won't let us. And frankly, I'm very upset to see those on the right behave like the woke Marxists that I fight every day. When you are not rational, when all you do is attack and bring people down, and when all you want to see is destruction, then that is woke. That is what they do. They don't have a guiding principle. They just are out to destroy things. They don't build, they tear down. We're different than that. We are not different than them.
If we continue to allow destructive people in this party to have a voice in it, to think that they're part of the conservative movement, then no, we're no different than them. We're no different than them. So I'm watching, as you're talking very eloquently, comment after divisive, nasty comment from Adrienne Melby. And I told you, I'm naming names. And there she is on that comment thread, being a disruptor, trashing, calling names over and over again. Who's she targeting? Who's she talking about? Talking about Disney? No. Talking about Evers? No. Talking about Call? No. Talking about Janet Protasewicz while other people are doing the hard lifting? No. She's on there trashing Robin Voss like a broken record again. She's not credible. She's not a serious person, and she's part of the problem.
Well,
and I'm calling people like that.
She lives here, right? She can't get elected to anything. Her husband can't get elected to anything. And in fact, when he ran, I believe he came in last or second last when he ran for school board. Everyone they have endorsed for public office has lost. So what does that say about the power of the Melbys? Nothing. They are divisive. They are angry. They are hateful people, which is really sad because I actually think they could do a lot of good if they wanted to be a bit more positive and encouraging.
She's not capable of that, Michelle.
They hate Robin
because she's now on the comment thread talking about I'm supposedly a homewrecker in my sex life from 14 years ago that she knows nothing about. Well, this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah, right. I mean, we could throw back other things against her, but you know what? I think we're bigger people than that. Or maybe not. Maybe I'll start. But
people like that need to understand who's credible and who's not. and the non-credible people like her who constantly disrupt and trash fellow conservatives, whether it's me or Robin Voss, they need to be isolated. They need to be shunned, and they need to be discredited and exposed. And that's it.
Adrian, are you still on disability and collecting food stamps? Because when you filed for bankruptcy, that's what you wrote down. Could you just share with us? Could you make that in your comment? I'd love to hear the answer to that.
I'd like to hear that too. Adrian, you got anything else? You've trotted out my 14-year-old sex life. You trotted out Adam Steen. Thank God he didn't win, because the whole legislature would have fallen apart if we didn't have Robin Voss strategically organizing everything. So thank God you failed there. You got anything better? You got anything original? Because I'm waiting to hear it. And I'd like you to argue why you're not the problem. Why people like you, the very small numbers that you are not the problem. Because you are. You're the problem.
She could also put down what she's doing to promote the Republican values and how she's going to help us take back the governor's house and win the Supreme Court in 2 years. I'd like to hear that.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that too, because I just see a bunch of name calling.
That's pretty much all I do.
You know what I always kind of relate them to is when I was younger in college, I used to deliver furniture. And me and my partner would be hauling up big 800-pound entertainment centers up the stairs. And almost every time, the woman would have some small little white dog that would be nipping at my ankles as I'm carrying this 800-pound entertainment center up the stairs. And I consider these people, these Melbys and everyone else, just to be the little white dog that's nipping at the ankles of the people that are doing all the heavy lifting.
You're so right about that. And how sad that we have those people, because if we would band together, if we would not have had people all over the state. This is, Jessica, you brought this up at the Republican women's thing on Wednesday night. We had an opportunity to win a supermajority in the assembly. The speaker's job is to bring back a majority, try to increase their majority, to raise money for that majority. And instead, our speaker, who has been the most successful fundraiser as a speaker in our state's history, our speaker spent all of his time knocking on doors in his own district instead of raising money and helping candidates outstate so we could win a supermajority, so that right now we could have been overriding our governor's vetoes. That's what Adrian Melby and her cohorts did in Racine County.
Well, Adrian just admitted she's a nobody. Well, we do agree with you on that, Adrian. Why are we giving you so much attention? Because you're destructive. Because people like you, and you're small in number, I would put Ali Schweitzer in that category. I'd put Badger State Resistance, Justin Schmitka, Daniel Schmitka Garcia, whatever his name is. Very small in number. Ian Jordan, put in that category. You go on social media and you trash and you name call the conservatives that are out there day in and day out doing sweat equity to get shit done. And you sit there on Twitter, you sit there on Facebook, and you think you're a somebody because you call people names. And I've just had it with people like you. I think you need to go away.
They organized a protest the day that Robin Voss was being sworn in as speaker, because they wanted to show members that they should not be voting for Robin Voss. Now think about the energy it took to do that. That was not
the most effective
at all. What a complete waste of time. They got some news coverage, which also showed every Republican in the state of Wisconsin that our party is divided. Yeah. What does that do to help us bring back a supermajority and to take over the governor's house in 2 years or 4 years?
With Robin, I always say that, and I'm proud to take the arrows that I've been getting because I've defended him. I'm proud to do that. I'm happy to do that because it's the right thing to do. And someone needed to finally step up and say it, because enough was enough. But, I always say about him, it's not his job to be popular. It's his job to grow and retain majorities. That's the very essence of what he's supposed to do. And then, of course, to advance conservative legislation forward and try to get it through and wrangle votes and all that. Well, he has taken us to the precipice of a supermajority. That's a really big deal. That would mean that the legislature could override Evers' vetoes. And, I think that's reachable. Like, that's actually in reach. And that's because in large part of the hard work that he's done. And yet you have these people like Adrian Melby sitting there on Facebook trying to pretend like they're somebody by calling other people names, other conservatives' names. Done. I'm done. I'm done being silent about it. And worse, some of them are advancing ideas that are very destructive to our candidates. When they're pushing things like decertification of the election, that is tied around the necks of our Republican candidates by the liberal media, by the Democratic Party. It is feeding them exactly the narrative that they want to tank our candidates. And that's a bigger problem, actually. That's a bigger problem. When they squawk loud enough that they get a little media attention, and then people think that they represent all of conservatism, and they certainly do not.
Don't you think that, though? Don't you think that the liberal media loves this infighting? They love when the crazies say something obnoxious, because then the TV stations can say, oh, this Republican activist said this crazy, stupid thing. And they can try to make it sound like all Republicans believe something so crazy and stupid.
Exactly.
It's this 0.01% of people out there that are supporting this crazy idea. But it's hurting all of us. And it's hurting every elected official out there from being successful at moving the conservative agenda forward. So we do need to shut these people up.
They need to be isolated. They don't represent us. Their ideologies and their behavior and their lack of decorum is not who we are. It is not who we are. And so I'm done, honestly, pussyfooting around them and being worried that I'm going to build their audience by talking about them. No. They want to do this kind of thing to fellow conservatives. They're going to do it publicly. They're going to get the weight of my audience thrown at them, and they'll be called out by name.
I know, but
called out by name.
But Jessica, the problem is they all form the fake profiles, and then they swarm you with fake profiles.
Then I'll delete those.
They're never going to go away. It's that
simple.
They're never going to go away.
See, here's the thing: they don't care. Like right now, they're creating all these fake profiles to say how ugly I am. Like I've had to delete about 3 fake profiles tonight that were saying I'm actually secretly horrifically ugly and nobody would really want to be with me. But I don't care. I don't care. If you think I'm ugly, if everyone looking at this thinks I'm ugly, I don't give a shit. Because I'm not here to be a beauty queen or win supermodel of the year. Nor could I, frankly, but I'm not trying to do that. I am trying to advance very specific ideas into the public conversation that I think are good for our state, that I think are good for our community. I think I have a very specific set of talents that equips me to do that in a special way, and that is the writing gift that I was given genetically by my Irish grandparents who were reporters. And they didn't give me a lot, but they gave me that craft and they gave me that gift. And so I'm trying to use it to help my state, a state I was born in, a state I was raised in, and a state I've never left. And I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to do it tonight. I'm doing it here. I'm going to do it tomorrow. And they can create 100 fake profiles saying I'm ugly. I just don't care because I'm not in it to be pretty. I don't know what to say.
It's unfortunate the attacks from women on other women. That's really unfortunate. I mean, it's the most vile attacks against Rebecca Clayfish, against, and then just recently with the Supreme Court race, Jennifer Doro. It's very disheartening. It's not going to move the needle for female conservatives in Wisconsin, in the country.
No one would want to deal with this.
Right. Well, that's it. That is why we have limited.
I'm going to deal with it. I'm not going anywhere. I think that, I feel like saying, can't we all just get along?
No. When people are going to call fellow conservatives a prostitute on a podcast, and when they're going to write vile comments like Adrian Melby just did directed at fellow conservatives, No, they need to be called out and shunned so that everyone knows who the disruptors are, who the bad people are.
And I think
we need to clean house, clean
they
up
don't
our
know
shop.
the backstory. I even see some of the comments coming up, and I know the backstory of some of this stuff that you know that I can't reveal. You can sometimes people say things and they don't understand that there's a whole backstory, and that some things happened and they were the far less something far worse could have happened, and some of the actions that are seen actually prevented something far less worse. And I'm sure with Speaker Voss, when we had him on, we were talking to him and asking questions and understanding that you have to legislate, and sometimes things happen and on the face of it you don't understand why, or you wish that there could have been a different outcome, but what happened prevented a far worse outcome. And that you're not, as a legislator, you're not a god, you're not a tyrant. You have to try and move the needle and get things done, and sometimes this is the way that you have to get things done. There has to be some compromise, and otherwise it could be so much worse. And just like what you were saying with abortion, I am 100% pro-life. My mom was 14 when she had me. She was supposed to abort me and she didn't. And then it's a very, very hard life, but now she has 18 grandchildren. I was the oldest of 4. So I am extremely pro-life, but I also am aware that we can't keep losing elections on the abortion issue, and we're going to have to find a way to compromise while doing as much as we can to protect innocent life, to protect unborn babies as much as we possibly can, because we are risking the fact that we could have abortion up to 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I absolutely don't want. I don't want unrestricted abortion up to 9 months. Right now we can't even I just had to deal with a MPS parent sent me that they're going to gender transition 5-year-olds in MPS schools without parents' permission. So if we are losing that battle, there's just so much bigger issues at stake than election integrity right now in what happened in 2020. And this, we are losing our children. We are losing our children. We're losing them to anxiety, depression, drugs, ideology, and we are losing our country. The dollar is our finances we're in a global economic mess. And I think we need to see the forest through the trees here. The crime, that's something that Jim and Jessica, you cover a lot. So I think we need to harness all of our energy and put it to something where we can make a difference, put it where it's useful, and not spend it on back channels, talking about a plan that's never going to happen, and actually make a concrete plan to move forward and win and get candidates across the finish line and get control of the governor and get control of, in 2024, the presidency. How about getting a supermajority in the assembly so that we can override Governor Evers? These are the things that we need to be so focused on, and instead attacking Jim and Jessica is such a waste of very valuable time and talent that could be used for good. And
it's an energy suck. It literally, it just sucks our energy up. And, I was reading some of the comments, just focus on the positive things. Most of the time I do, but I want to be very clear about why I'm speaking out the way that I'm speaking out tonight. Like, you don't understand how much of this I deal with. You really don't. Like, you literally don't. How many names I get called every week, how many vile personal attacks I get about, honestly, things people know nothing about. They really know nothing about. They've read a liberal media article from 14 years ago and they think they understand what went on in my life, and they don't. And it's not relevant even remotely to the present day. And I am done with it. And it's not just me. Let me just finish for a second. I've seen this politics of what's the word? Of destruction going on in the conservative movement for too long. So I get back in the public debate, right? I'm like, okay, I'm going to wade back into this mess. And what do I see happen? I see the primary unfold the way it did with Rebecca Clayfish. And I see, a woman whose children were attacked.
Mm-hmm.
So there was this Ian Jordan guy went on TikTok and he attacked her child who was underage, and she ended up being horrifically bullied in school. And then people wonder why Rebecca isn't wanting to come out and be involved more aggressively and publicly right now than she is. Give me a break. Her children were attacked. And that wasn't the only incident. She was whatever you think. If you wanted Michaels, I don't care. If you wanted Rebecca, if you wanted Kevin, I don't even care. Like Kevin Nicholson was actually my first choice in the primary, if you want to know the honest truth. But I will say this, Rebecca Clayfish was a damn good conservative. She was a conservative fighter, and Joel Clayfish is too. And when Donald Trump, who by the way I voted for 3 times, stood on that podium or whatever it was at that rally, and I was in the crowd covering it, when he had the audacity to call Rebecca Clayfish the names he called her, whatever, he's trashing her, and to call Joel Clayfish names, and to say Robin Voss is a Democrat, like I'm just done. I'm just done. And then the vile stuff against Jennifer Doro in the primary, the emails I saw that went around from some members of this so-called fringe patriot, they call themselves patriots, they're not movement, directed at Jennifer Doro. This is what people don't see. I saw this. There was an email that went to pretty much every church on the right and county party in the state with the most vile personal attacks against Jennifer Doro. Unfair, false, sliming her harder than anyone on the left could possibly do. And then I start to wonder, did that cost her the primary? How many county parties and churches did that go to? And how did that help us in the general election in April? Okay. Right. And then Robin Voss distracting him, the only man in a position to hold back the agenda of Tony Evers right now because he's Assembly Speaker. And just the constant, I'll say it again, energy suck and distraction of the constant level of harassment he has had to fight off from people on the right. Now, that doesn't mean that me or Jim or Robin or Michelle or Brian Schimming or Rebecca Clayfish or God knows who else is immune from criticism. We can all take it. I love a good debate. Come on my wall and challenge me intellectually. Debate the issues with me. If you don't agree with me, I'll respect that and I'll never delete you. I'll never block you. But when you cross a line, how about Jennifer Doro's kid? Mm-hmm. Who do you think leaked that? Now, I don't know. It could have been the left, but I don't know. I don't know. Because we were peddled some very bad stuff by conservatives who are trying to get us to write very destructive stuff about Jennifer Doro that we passed on. So this isn't just about me. I'm an example of it, but I'm done. So and they want to do this. These people want to do this to people on our side, including the most effective people on our side. They will do it the hard way, and they're going to have to go through me, and they're going to have to go through my audience. And I'll tell you right now, people, it is a lot bigger than yours.
You guys right now are the only conservative media doing what you're doing. We have MacGyver Institute, and that's really about it. You're the only ones left, and we can't have you quit. We can't have you pull back. Like today, I believe you're the only outlet that covered what Trish Hansen did in Racine County with John Tate. Is that right? I mean, she sent it everywhere, and I think you were the only ones who covered it.
Yep, Dan O'Donnell had it, and then Journal Sentinel did write on it today. But it did not receive that. And matter of fact, the Racine County, Racine Journal Times, they didn't even have it until later today, and it was an AP story, so they didn't even do an exclusive on it.
And Vicki McKenna talked about it today. She mentioned it her first hour, and then the Madison hour. So, but it comes from you. Like they receive the news from you, and then it's able to be promoted on 11:30.
But that's only conservative talk, right? So that only hits people who agree with us. We need people doing what Wisconsin Right Now does in print, that can send this out to papers that, newspapers across the state and across the country that pick up these articles, because talk radio is awesome. I'm an avid listener, but that reaches people who agree with us.
You guys should be sending your stuff to Daily Caller too, and so they can pick it up and put some of these stories. I bet they pick up and they go national, like Daily Caller, Daily Wire, but Daily Caller has been really good about picking up things that I've put on Twitter, and that some of my friends they'll pick up a Twitter thread, and in a couple days they'll churn out an article. So you guys have a fully done article. I think that you could get some of your stuff go even farther.
Well, I mean, I will tell you, and first of all, I'm going to say one aside. So Adrienne Melby, she's still at it again, because that's who she is. She's destructive and harassing, and she's just a bad person.
Yeah.
She said, I don't block people, laugh out loud. Yeah, actually I do. I block people like you, Adrienne, who come on people's walls, come on the walls of fellow conservatives to talk about their old sex lives that you know nothing about, to trash fellow conservative leaders because you're obsessed, absolutely obsessed with Robin Voss. You disgust me, and you're right. I do block people like you. So, and I'll do it again. I don't block people who challenge my ideas. I block people who come on to make intellectual arguments, even if I disagree with them and they're on the other side. But I will block people like you. And I would encourage every single conservative to do so as well, to shun people who are the disruptors. But going back to what you said, setting the narrative is something that Jim and I have tried really hard to do. And I had talked about Charlie Sykes before, and I've given a lot of thought to this. And again, let me be very clear. I think he's a complete traitor, and I can't stand him now. He sold out everything and everyone he ever purported to believe in. But back in the day, Charlie set the narrative. He was very, very influential. And I learned a lot watching him do that. He was a thought leader. He was not just uttering talking points that were everywhere. He would sort of lead where the conversation was going. I think what Jim and I are striving to do is to do a variation of that, but also to get our narratives into the liberal media. And so at the event we were at in Racine County last night, Will Martin, who he ran for lieutenant governor, wonderful person. We need to bring him on. Just a fantastic, oh my God, an example of everything that's right about the conservative movement right now. And he said, and I really appreciated this, he said, you know what? Your parole series, and we started talking about John Tate, right? Like back in May, no one was talking about John Tate. I don't think anyone in the public really knew his name other than in Racine, where he was on the Common Council. But Will Martin said, the parole series didn't knock Evers out of office. But he said, have you noticed he stopped talking about emptying out the prisons? That, remember, his first term mantra was, I'm going to reduce the prison population by 50%. Will Martin said, you put him on his heels, and, collectively, not just us, but the conservatives fought for that narrative, fought against that narrative, and we put him on his heels. He doesn't talk about that anymore. I thought that was really a great point I had never thought of, and I was really flattered by it. And that is ultimately what Jim and I are trying to do, I think.
Right.
Yeah, Will Martin's great. I like him a lot.
Yeah, thought leader, and that's something we need to have on this podcast and have
For
his
sure.
ideas out there more. Very smart guy.
For sure.
All right.
And Trisha Hansen. You need to have Trisha Hansen on. She is a rock star.
Yeah, you meant
super smart district attorney. When you hear what she is uncovering about what's happening in Racine, your minds are going to be blown. And the challenge, it's probably happening in other cities too.
Is it something you can talk about, or is it confidential at this point?
Well, I think it started with what's happening now with John Tate.
Yeah.
I mean, someone turned this in to her in October or November, and they started with this investigation. They had Kenosha County do the investigation. It takes months, actually, with the subpoenas and, requesting information, but to come up with the facts so that she can charge someone, because you should not be sitting on a city council or a trustee or village board and be able to create a job for yourself. And when you look at John Tate's timeline, it's clear as day, that he was setting himself up for a job.
Yeah.
That's illegal. And this is a warning shot, I think, to everyone out there who might be thinking about setting themselves up for a cushy job, that people are paying attention.
Good.
Yeah. And thank goodness we have Patricia Hansen. But if this would have happened in another county, let's say Milwaukee County, I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell that this thing would have ever been prosecuted.
Yeah, and I think most of our listeners, I know people are really well informed in this audience, so they probably already know what happened, but in case you don't, Patricia Hansen, right? She's the district attorney of Racine County. She's a Republican, and she criminally charged John Tate, the former executive director of the Wisconsin Parole Commission, the guy that was ousted belatedly by Evers as a result of, in large part, honestly, our stories about his looming parole of a convicted wife killer, Douglas Balsavage, last May. But anyway, John Tate, the charges allege that he, was president of the Racine Common Council and sits on it, and that he voted, along with others, of course, to approve a new position for a violence interrupter organizer. And I think this was paid by ARPA money. And so basically he's creating the position. Then he turns around and he got the position.
He negotiated for more money, though. Remember that.
Yes, that's an important point.
And vacation time. And if I remember, he also got a $10,000 housing credit of some kind that he negotiated.
Yep.
Yeah. And then 3 people interviewed for the job. I think 20 applied. They interviewed 3 and he got the job. Yeah. And he's the chairman, right, of the city council.
They had set, right, the wage, had this band, and the top was 101. He's like, I'm really worth 125. And they gave it to him. The guy who let violent criminals out of prison. They decided this was the best person to work with the district attorney, in the police department, putting bad people away in Racine County. I mean, it's unbelievable.
You know what's interesting, what was kind of left out of the complaint and the charges is who authorized him to get the job? Who picked him? I mean, they had to have known he was on the council and voting to approve the creation of this job. And then they turn around and they pick him. Why aren't they under the microscope and being scrutinized?
That's a good question, Michelle.
Wasn't it social services, or it was someone who dealt with the social services department that chose him, but who worked with him in the past, for sure.
All right. Shocking.
Adrienne Malvy's still at it, still trashing fellow conservatives, because that's what she does, because she's a bad person.
Yeah.
Still at it. Like a broken record, on and on and on and on. And
that's
what, Adrienne, you're making this podcast pretty damn entertaining. Thank you for the audience.
Yeah,
we appreciate it.
It is entertaining.
I want to remind people, too, that regarding John Tate, that the state Senate had the ability to fire him back when we uncovered the Pearl stories and things that he had been doing. The state Senate could have convened a special session and fired John Tate. And LeMahieu, state leader of the Senate, failed to do that. And then that gave the Governor Evers the upper hand, because then Governor Evers demanded his resignation, and he gave it. And really, that was really an opportunity for Republicans to flex some muscle, and they failed to do that. And then now look at it. Does show that John Tate really is a corrupt person that had no business being in that position.
So, Jim, I'm curious, as a former police officer, your opinion about the concept of violence interruption or violence prevention. This seems to be this new wave, on the left. This is their cover story, right? So they can pretend that they're for public safety and doing something, at election time, when really behind, at the same time, they're decimating police staffing levels and things.
Well, I thought you put it perfectly last night where you said really what it means is you're just taking resources and money away from law enforcement, the true violence interceptors. I mean, there's no way to measure these violent prevention people. How are you ever going to measure? We see outstanding crime everywhere. So clearly these programs aren't working already. There's no way to measure it. They won't release how they're measuring it. They won't give us details. And it's going to be really interesting this summer, especially with like the Republican convention. How about the Democratic convention in Chicago? All these organizations, what are they going to do to prevent violence from occurring?
I look forward to when they start sending the social workers out, right? When you have that marital spat, and obviously violence often erupts from that. You are not going to see many people going into social work after they have a few of those experiences.
No.
It's good luck with that.
And I have to wonder how much more. This is just the peak or the tip that we're going to see of fraud and of coming out of these violence prevention programs, especially out of Milwaukee. I think once there's some true audits being done, I think we're going to see how much wasted money that these things really are, and how much they're just gifted money going to people.
Well, they're grifts, I think.
Yeah.
And we did, for records request into the city of Milwaukee Office of Violence, quote unquote, prevention. Look how that's working out. Yeah. And that's what, we found they're spending money on t-shirts and trinkets and virtual summits and just all this nonsense. And at the same time, the Milwaukee Police Department has, been depleted in terms of its staffing. Like, I remember the days when MPD had 2,100 sworn officers, and now I think they're down to like 1,600, and that's probably a little exaggerated. And then the left wonders why cities are imploding, why violence is exploding. Let's talk for a minute, you guys, about what we saw down in Chicago in the Loop the other day.
So I have friends that live in Illinois, not too far outside of Chicago, and it's hard to watching that is so depressing, and just that kind of wanted, and then the response afterwards. But then, did you see? They beating up that white woman. That was hard to watch. I couldn't watch that whole scene, but just the random, I just imagine that had it been different, how this would be like a George Floyd incident, but because it's a white woman getting beat up just because she went to the wrong door or something, that was awful. But kind of watching that level of wanton violence of young people, and that it was just kind of laughed off. And then the new mayor even said, well, what do you expect? These kids are disadvantaged, or these kids have experienced some kind of trauma.
Those young people, don't you understand? Those young people just don't have enough social outlets. If we just gave them more social outlets, they would be fine. So this is what happens when a city does not put bad people in prison and in jail, when they don't charge people for vandalism, when they require store owners to hire their own security guards because they're no longer going to provide police officers downtown to protect their stores. Yeah. So you guys saw a few days ago, I just posted, man, I miss going to Chicago because I missed it. I used to go down there to shows. We went down to the museums and people were like, Chicago's awesome. What do you mean? Come down. You should come visit. And then obviously this happened right now. And it just was an example of why people are not going to Chicago anymore, because they don't feel safe. And you have a mayor who's not going to prosecute anyone and who doesn't say what those young people did was wrong. And so it's only going to get worse.
The new mayor's worse than Lori Lightfoot. I mean, he's an avowed socialist. He's a, you know, a professor or an avowed socialist, and all he did was excuse their behavior. You know, he wouldn't condemn it. He wouldn't condone. I saw repeated interviews where I'm sure even kind of more progressive journalists said to him, you know, you've got to condone this, right? And he just wouldn't. He refused to condone it. He refused to say this is wrong. Very few people were arrested or went to jail. And now you've sent the message to right before summer, mind you. I mean, the crime season it's only just beginning. I mean, Jim is, you know,
right. It's April. This is just the beginning. What's it going to be like when we have 95-degree days in these inner cities?
Yeah. It's going to get bad.
And you just had that mayor give him a green light, say, go ahead, go for it.
And guess what? He just got elected. The people of Chicago voted for him. They had the opportunity to get a Democrat that was at least sane. And they chose.
But then we will, I mean, this will affect Wisconsin because more people will leave Cook County. They will move up to Kenosha County. They won't leave their Democrat voting history with them in Illinois. And they are going to start to turn Kenosha, which had flipped and voted for Trump. They elected Sam Kirkman, a Republican, as county executive for the first time in decades. They have a Republican as county executive. So the more people that leave Chicago because they want to get away from that crime and raise their families in a good, safe neighborhood are probably going to bring their politics with them.
You think so?
That's a good point.
Good point.
Yeah, I haven't heard that point before, and that's a really astonishingly good point. So Annie, my daughter, you know, she's turning 18 in like a couple days. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so I was trying to decide. I said, Annie, what do you want to do on Sunday? You know, we'll go somewhere, we'll do something. What do you want to do? And she said Chicago. And I can't, for the first time in my life, allow that. Like, I can't take my kid to the Magnificent Mile. And Annie and I have done that several times in the past few years. You know, we've gone down there and we stayed overnight and we went to the stores, and we always enjoyed that. The Art Institute, Navy Pier, all the good things Chicago has to offer. And for the first time, like, I could not say yes to that. And I think there's a lot of people who feel that way. And what, you know, honestly, what the left is doing to American cities right now at warp speed is shocking. And quite honestly, what you're seeing is the failure of liberal social policies and liberal policies toward the police and the defund the police movement. You're seeing the failure of liberal policies at sort of warp speed. I mean, look at Portland. Look what's happening in Portland. Look what's happening in San Francisco. Look what's happening in New York City. You know, Annie and I used to go there every year too. We'd go see the big tree and go, you know, skating in Rockefeller Center. And now I have to think twice about that too. I mean, there are people being thrown into, you know, on subway tracks. I mean, again, these pendulums swing back, but at what cost? And honestly, the cost is borne mostly by minority communities, by the Black community, where, you know, we just received an email about a new report coming out showing the disparate victimization rate, you know, suffered by Black Wisconsinites. So Jim, you just took your daughter to Chicago not that long ago. Would you do it again?
We wouldn't. I definitely would not go there at night. I mean, we always visit the museums and the aquarium and stuff. And obviously we went to a Taylor Swift concert a couple years ago. But yeah, I would be very concerned about taking any of my kids at night now, just like in Milwaukee. I wouldn't take them at night.
You know what you're going to see happening is the economy, the businesses, the business community they're going to move out of these communities. They're already doing it.
Well, Walmart, they already are. Look at Walmart. Walmart's
right.
moving out. Yeah.
And Whole Foods moved out of San Francisco, and we're seeing, you know, all of this. Walmart, I think, closed like 12 stores nationally in high crime areas. And, you know, so in Milwaukee, there was a Walmart that's closing. So I think we're going to see like the economic centers move even more so out of the cities, which will only spiral, you know, their decline more quickly. But will people hold Democratic politicians accountable for the ramifications of their policy choices? That's the problem.
Did you guys have Tori Lowe on your podcast?
We have not had him on yet, but we were on his radio show.
Because he really dives into this. I mean, he is no Republican, but he hates the Democrat establishment. And he talks a lot about the only people who have jobs in the inner city have jobs working for a nonprofit through a government grant. And they like that. Like, those people want to keep that money coming into those churches and those nonprofits because they make a very good wage. And so they don't want the people actually to elevate themselves and do better in life. But he would have a lot probably to say about the city of Milwaukee and where that's at, and how this crime and the stores leaving. I mean, the stores leaving hurt the good residents that actually do have jobs and want to stay in the downtown. Every time a Walgreens closes or whatnot, because too many people are shoplifting and they just can't prosecute, or they don't prosecute the people who are stealing from them. It hurts the poor and the people who live in the cities.
Right. Can you imagine being elderly and needing a lot of prescriptions, and now all these stores around you are closing up? So, and if you don't have a car, you can't drive. How much more of inconvenience that is to get to a pharmacy or to get food or milk or bread. Welcome to these Marxist cities.
Yeah. Right. And then you hear the left and the media doing stories and complaining about food deserts, right? Which are a problem, where people in the inner cities can't get healthy produce and high quality food. And, honestly, some people were going to Walmart for that. It's affordable, and they have these grocery sections. Well, this is, again, the product of failed liberal policy decisions. But the media never painted that way. That's part of the problem.
And then you look at the success in areas like in the red states, like in Florida, where they are tough on crime, and the flourishing and the businesses and the not that anything is perfect, but you see what it's like to have a leader who actually will not care what anyone says. That's why I just love Ron DeSantis. I love watching him. He gets attacked, and it's just like, I'm doing the right thing. And that's what I think he said. He was interviewed by Benny Johnson recently, and he said, are you worried about the stances you're taking? And he's like, I don't take polls to decide what I'm going to do. I do what I think is right. And then I will try to bend the polls to support my decision. And that's just the kind of leader that I want to see in the White House. I think we need someone extraordinarily tough to go up against this bureaucratic monster. And what you've described, it's not only it's a government bureaucracy, but also a lot of nonprofit organizations and 501c3s and progressive. They all just sort of work together. They're so intertwined, and we need to have leaders that aren't going to that are just going to do the right thing, and they're not going to care what any of these groups say. And you're fighting an entrenched bureaucracy, and it's hard, but you can do it, and you can win. I still think the majority of people want safety. They don't want lawlessness. There is just, again, like we talk, a very loud and vocal group that just captures the narrative, and a media that refuses to tell the truth. If only the media were like you guys, if only the local news told the whole story, things would turn around so fast if they were honest. It's so terrible that the media is so dishonest right now. Our constitutional republic absolutely depends on a functioning free press that tells the truth. And instead we have a press that is just an arm of the Democratic Party. But that's what it is. And we've got to figure out how to message outside of it, because that's not going to change anytime soon. So
I'm going to tell you, I agree. I agree with you completely, Scarlett. And what I've witnessed, because I've been in the media in different capacities, I've played with a lot of different formats for 25 years. And the reporters 20 years ago, they were Democrats for the most part. Some were secret conservatives, I found out later, because they talked to me now. And turns out they were conservatives, like who knew? But certainly the social control in the newsroom was liberal, oriented and dominated. Those reporters, they were Democrats or perhaps, but they understood a story. They were still willing to write stories that made Democrats look bad, because I think they actually did regard themselves as watchdogs. They didn't always get it right, but I think they recognized a story. The reporters today, I don't recognize. And so when Jim and I started doing this, I said, well, one way to sort of defeat them or get our narrative out is to do really good journalism, like investigative reporting where we come up with stuff that's factual, that's documented, that's credible, that they have to cover. Because the bias, I think, often comes in through the things the media omit, that they ignore, or they shape a narrative themselves and they bury like the counter narrative in paragraph 20 and all of that. That's where the real bias comes in. What I discovered through the course of the governor's primary and the AG's race and into the Supreme Court was that doesn't hold true. You can come up with something so compelling, so documented, so verifiable, and they just won't cover it. They are advocates in many cases. They have crossed the line. I don't know if it's their Trump hate, their absolute animus for Trump, remember when they all started putting in there that Trump falsely said this and Trump falsely said that, like just injecting pure opinion into their news stories, but they don't apply that to Hillary or Biden or, whoever else on the left. We never see stories, Joe Biden falsely said whatever. That's when I first noticed, I'm like, okay, this is different. Like they're getting really blatant about it.
Yeah.
So in the governor's race, they just refused, for example, to cover the voices of victims, family members. They censored literally the voices of victims, family members, and almost to the one didn't believe it was a story that the state was systemically failing to notify family members of murder victims about paroles and parole hearings, and systemically failing to notify law enforcement of the same when it's a requirement of state law. They are such advocates, they didn't think that was a story. They thought the story was that Tim Michaels mixed up pardons and paroles, and they flogged that one for like weeks to distract. And that's when I said, you know what, Jim, this is something new. These people are different. They're advocates. And then fast forwarding, and I'll be brief and let other people talk, but like in the Supreme Court race, we had named people on video and audio alleging that a state Supreme Court candidate used the N-word and committed elder abuse. We had six sources on the elder abuse accusations, and yet the media, almost to the one, censored the story. When the Journal-Sentinel did report it, they twisted it that maybe Janet was going to sue us. And then when she walked that back like 3 hours later, they refused to tell readers that she had walked it back. I mean, it was just, I'm like actually aghast as a student of journalism, as a teacher of journalism, because those are obviously newsworthy stories. So honestly, going forward, I think I'm thinking a lot about how we go forward with a media, with a liberal media that just won't do its job.
Yeah.
And I think part of the answer has to be growing the reach of conservative media so it's so big that we don't need their biased media filter anymore, that we can get our message out to enough people in the state where they find out about these kinds of things, despite the attempts of the liberal media and big tech, honestly, to censor them.
Yep.
I don't know how we do that exactly. We're working on it. Jim and I think and talk about this kind of thing every day.
There has to be more funding.
Yeah, more funding.
And so that you can branch out. So when you can promote however you can do on social media to I'm getting tired right now, but just to have more people aware, because you know how it is on Facebook, you get throttled so easily. It's hard to get the message out.
Yeah, and our links are shadow banned. I mean, I know for a fact if you
Yeah.
share a story that link is severely shadow banned. So Facebook bans us. I don't think Twitter now does. We seem to get pretty good reach with Twitter.
Twitter's
We have
good.
an email list of 45,000 people. But yeah, we're not part members of the AP, so we can't get our story out that way. Not that anyone would publish our story anyways. And yeah, you know, now with this civic media taking over radio stations around Wisconsin, I mean, we are at a real disadvantage, and it's something that Jessica and I discuss daily on how we're going to deal with this.
Like ideally enough people would become members of our site, and unfortunately that means paid members. Like $10 a month is what we've been asking people. And if we had enough, we could fund another reporter, for example. And
Yeah.
Jim has created prototype sites. He's created, what did you create, Jim? Maybe you talk about that. You created prototype.
We've created approximately 12 smaller sites, like Racine right now, up north right now, Eau Claire right now, basically all the major metropolitan areas in Wisconsin, so that we can start doing more of the hyper local reporting, you know, school board races, town races. And ideally, we'd like to get a couple reporters for each of those sites to
That's
start
a great
reporting.
idea.
But, you know, that takes money and that takes funding. And that's just something that we don't have at this point.
I'd love Michelle to run Racine right now. That'd be awesome. That'd be so awesome.
Yeah, for part of that.
Yeah.
Maybe we need some help.
You need some media in Racine, that's for sure.
Oh my God. You have the Racine Journal-Times. It's horrific.
It is.
They could even do their own story on John Tate being charged with a felony, and he's the president of the Racine Common Council.
I do think you run into 22 with some of that, though, because we subscribe to the newspaper here, but very, very few conservatives get the paper. So it's kind of like they can't even call and complain that they didn't cover the John Tate story because the conservatives don't subscribe anymore. So you wonder if they're just pandering to the people who are still subscribing. I mean, including the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.
But Stephanie Susak said, she said, where are the George Soroses of our party? It just seems the left is more billionaires, strangely. And unfortunately, our two billionaires, Diane Hendricks and Dick Uihlein, they don't always get along. Like, they don't always agree on the candidate to push. And I wish there was someone, I mean, it's hard if you're do with billionaires.
We had the Koch brothers, right? I mean, you know,
yeah.
I think one of them deceased now. Is that right?
Yes.
Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Let's remember, before we get too far away, it's really Liz Uihlein who started the company. She just gives Dick a lot of money. So Liz Uihlein and Diane Hendricks are the billionaires in Wisconsin.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I guess I didn't know that. But
who's the guy in Florida that was in Chicago? Citadel. He's a big billionaire Republican donor. He owns Citadel, and he moved out of Chicago. What's his name?
I don't know, because he doesn't give any money.
Ken Griffin. You're talking about Ken Griffin.
He gives a ton of money. He actually did give money in Wisconsin, but he gives money to a lot of the national candidates, and he's one of Ron DeSantis's donors, I believe, as well.
But we don't just need billionaires. We need average people who are willing to give up $25. I mean, the Republican Party has always had this problem. They're like, well, the party should fund this. The party should fund this. There is no party. There is no hierarchy of people with a money tree. The Republican Party, even the executive committee, it's crazy when they talk about the Republican Party being the establishment. The executive committee is made up of district leadership. So the county parties elect their chairman. They go to a district. They elect chairman. They're all volunteers, but they make up the state leadership. It's all volunteers. There is no money there. Everything that's raised for RPW someone has to go out and ask for a contribution. So our people just need to get a little bit more comfortable with giving that $25 a month to candidates or to Wisconsin Right Now or whatever venue they want to see more of, because we can't rely on the billionaires because we've lost them. The billionaires, well, most, and they've always usually been far more liberal. So we need to just buck up and write checks and help out people we believe in, and especially give you guys money because we need you to continue.
Yeah.
Well, we need to continue, but we want to grow and expand. And I would love to have, for example, up north right now. And, we're working on ideas to do that. I really believe my life's cause is trying to wrestle back control of the media from the left in the state, because I think they've been very destructive to the state in terms of what advancing policies and causes and positions that I don't think are good for the state. And we're trying to do that, but but other people are doing it in their own way, like Scarlett and the Liberty Moms. They're out there in the trenches, like fighting day in and day out on the education issues that they care so much about, and you, Michelle, I see you at county party events, the people in the county parties all over the state that take the time to like sit at the county fair booths and go knock on doors, the tireless volunteers that were door knocking for Dan Kelly during the election. I mean, all of those people I just have great respect for. But it's a problem when we're being outspent. I mean, it's hard to win elections when you're outspent, right?
I just read an article, though, that talked about what's like Glenn Youngkin in Virginia and how the Republicans in Virginia are way outpacing the Democrats in fundraising. And that wasn't the case before he became governor. So I think when you're the out of power, when you're not, your party's not holding the governor's office, I think it's more challenging to raise money. And it's funny how things flip when your party is in power. For, I'm sure, various reasons you all probably know better than I. But I also think that Glenn Youngkin has, and the people behind him have figured out some funding formulas. And I think we should look around and look at the states that are very successful and have flipped from being in the negative as far as fundraising to now outpacing Democrats with fundraising. And, Glenn Youngkin, I was here, I met him a couple times and he came to Wisconsin. I think why maybe RPW needs to communicate with some of the leadership in Virginia, in Florida, in Iowa. Iowa's extremely successful in their fundraising. Find out what we can learn. I think we need to branch out and talk to the GOP in states where things are successful and going well, and think, what can we do differently? We, when Scott Walker, we were doing things pretty well. We had a good system, and now he's out of power. And I think we're trying to find our footing. We can't go back to the way things were done under Scott Walker. We've got to find a new way to a new leadership and new funding sources and new ways to raise money. But we seriously have to raise money as conservatives and as a party in our state. We do have to figure this out, or we will lose, because money is the milk of politics. And I'm a political scientist, and that has always been true, and it is true to this day. You need money to win. And if we are consistently way behind Democrats, we'll have trouble winning. We need that money. We need to be able to get our message out, and that's the way to do it.
So I'm not laughing at you, Scarlett, because you're very eloquent. I'm laughing at Matt Allen being shocked that we're able to talk for 3 hours. He doesn't know me and Scarlett.
He doesn't. Yeah, Matthew, this doesn't surprise me at all. They could go another 3 hours. So,
Poor Jim. He's like, oh my God, make it end. No, I'm kidding.
I want to
I'm
make
kidding.
one comment quick to Christopher O'Brien's comment here. Here he's talking about there's a network of liberal radio up north. It's absolutely terrible to listen to. That's what I'm talking about. That's that civic media. They now own at least 17 radio stations around the state, and they are broadcasting their progressive stuff all around the state, and they are going to dominate the state very soon within the year. And it's something that I don't even know how we overcome it, Jessica, at that point.
No, I don't know. I mean, because they're spending millions. Like, I'm not a millionaire, you're not a millionaire. Like,
No, right.
they're spending millions to strategically buy up talk radio stations. You're right. They're camouflaging it as like sports radio and stuff to lure people in, and then they're going to feed them liberal propaganda because they see the success of, you know, conservative talk radio. Obviously, just look at the power of Regular Joe or Meg Ellefson or the folks down in, you know, at WISN 1130 to actually flip elections and things. You know, look at like the primary where, you know, you saw the voter patterns, you could see the influence of Meg and Regular Joe up there in Wausau and Brown County. They see that and they're replicating it and they're putting a lot of money behind it. And, you know, I wanted to pick up on something Michelle said. I do think it's a really interesting point where you said, unfortunately, there isn't this mythical Republican Party turnout machine operation fundraising thing. Like, I think I thought there was. I don't know about you, Jim. I think we thought like there was some mystical, I don't know what we thought it was.
I mentioned this last night too. I always assumed there was this great big control room somewhere. Strategy was being decided and research
Wouldn't that be awesome?
done. Yeah, all these people with computers figuring all this stuff out.
Yes.
And then once I dived into it, I realized it's like, oh, it's Jessica and me.
Shimmy.
Right, all of their union staff. So union staff is really there year round so that they can turn out the Democrats during elections. Every community organizer organization, they have year round staff. Their only job is to turn out liberals during election cycles. Who do we have? Our people, I mean, you do have paid campaign staffers, but they are paid only during the campaign season by certain candidates. So you are stuck in the Republican Party with volunteers. And that's what you've got. And then you hear people, and there's talk radio folks that complain that the party's not doing more. It's kind of like, well, we are the party. That's what you have to work with here.
Yes. I'm now a vice chair in Ozaukee County. I mean, I am again a part of another endeavor in which I am in the deficit financially because I don't even want to turn in the receipts. Like it's just going to be an in-kind donation. I'll get the stuff. It's an in-kind donation because, you're just scraping the pennies trying to put your event together. You do an event and everything goes into that. And then you start over again. And we did our own flyers. We printed off our own flyers to distribute this last election, our own postcards, because there isn't the money from the state party.
But I mean, if people are willing to do the work, Racine County, I'm going to throw this out there. We have a goal of raising $50,000 to help candidates next spring. I believe we're going to get it done. We just raised $15,000 at our Lincoln Day dinner this year. I know it's not as much as some of the larger counties, but for a small county like Racine County, we did pretty good. Thanks to you two, by the way, for being our guest speakers. But I think county parties can do more. I don't think they always know how. I think people are afraid to ask for money. And they think money is evil. Well, unfortunately, you can't have speech without money to pay for it. So I think we just need to do more training.
We're a new board, and that's what we're trying to figure out. My goal is increase membership and raise money. We have got to raise money so that next fiscal year we can help candidates. That's what our goal is, and everything we do, we've got to think, how are we going to raise money? How are we going to increase our donations, and what can we do for our community so that they see us as vital and they want to give us money? We need to be doing good work, and visibly doing that work so that folks in Ozaukee County think, I want to donate my $25, my $50. I want to pay to attend that event because I see that they're working really hard. And not only that, when they come to an event, I want to sign up and I want to help too. And we try and make it fun. We can't forget the fun. This isn't drudgery. I always have fun. When I'm in the office and I'm hanging out with folks, whatever the age, I'm having fun talking to people, like-minded people. And it's always really great to see people come in and just be so happy to be hanging out with conservatives and feel like I'm not alone. And I feel like I'm alone. And it's so great to be in this space with other fellow conservatives where I can be who I am and say what I want. And so again, joyful warrior, there's a lot for us to be, we have to project happiness and joy and not doom and gloom all the time.
Well, I mean, I was really enjoying last night when Jim and I spoke at this. It was the Republican Women of Southeastern Wisconsin. It was in Racine, but the room was so engaged and so just informed. Like I learned things during the Q&A from the people. Didn't you think that, Jim?
Yeah, I did. I learned stuff. Yeah. Ken Brown, I thought had some really good insight. Yeah. Oh,
these are people who really care and they really get it and they're hardworking. They took the time out from their night to be there, and it gave me hope. It was an optimistic room. Like no one's giving up. Literally, no one's gonna give up. But Michelle, I was thinking back to I remember 15 years ago, roughly, and I remember the Republican Party was sort of ahead of the game with data. And we had something called the voter vault. That's what they called it. And I remember talking to people about it and used it actually in a mayoral race, which was the only election or the only campaign I ever actually helped run. And we won by a couple hundred votes using that very targeted voter vault data. And I'm sort of shocked that doesn't seem to exist anymore.
They still have that. We just need to access it. So here's another challenge. Many county parties have been taken over by the tinfoil hat people, the ankle biters. They don't want to help candidates get elected. They really just want to complain and they want to tear down the people who are currently elected. It's sad. Those tools are available to every county party chairman across the entire state. And it's up to that county party if they want to give access to those tools to candidates. But it's out there. We used it in Racine County and we won most of our contested races. And Henry Perez came really close to taking out Corey Mason in the city of Racine.
One thing that Jim and I have talked about doing as we go forward here as well is focusing our energy on some of those hyper-local races and doing it a lot earlier. People have to remember this is the first campaign season that we went through as Wisconsin right now. And we learned things from it, like things we'll do differently, things, we want to change, things that worked and we'll do again. And one thing I regret is that we didn't focus more on in the fall, that super majority, because we don't have the reach, I don't think, honestly, to flip a statewide race. We do have a lot of audience. We've had almost 11 million reads of our stories since August 2020 with almost no budget.
Actually, so we're going on 12 million.
Oh,
we have
really?
1.5 million. Okay. Yeah, we're going on 12.
Wow. So, I don't want to undersell and say no one reads us or something, but nonetheless, I do think it's hard to flip a statewide election. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to get to the point where we could do that with these right now satellites all over the state. But I feel like if we focused our energies on these legislative races, some of the mayoral races, I wish we'd engaged earlier for Henry Perez because he's a great guy. He was a great candidate. And Corey Mason's awful. The Green Bay mayoral race as well. We're two people, so of course our energy was sucked up by these statewide races. The Pearl series was exhausting. The Janet stuff was exhausting. But going forward, I want to shift a little bit to hyper local. I think
that's good. I mean, we lost one of our board candidates, school board candidates, lost by 37 votes, and I thought after this that I wish I would have focused more on the school board candidates, and I would have done my endorsement list earlier and tried to write some articles for Wisconsin Right Now earlier. And next time that's going to be my focus. Like, I'm going to pump out articles about these more local races where I think you're right, where you do some stories, they will make a huge difference, because it's going from zero, absolutely zero, where these candidates get no attention to some amplification. That's a huge thing. I put this comment up there: the lacks insight into rural Wisconsin, no disrespect. I think that could be true, and I think I would like more insight into how we can help in rural Wisconsin. Like, what can I do? What especially with the school. I know that those are school board races that definitely can be won.
I have a thought on that. Like, first of all, I'm from rural Wisconsin. I grew up in Ladysmith. A lot of people may not know that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So yeah, I grew up in northwestern Wisconsin in a very small town. In fact, for a lot of my high school years, I actually lived in a town outside of a town called Sheldon, which was in it was 18 miles from Ladysmith, and it had 200 people in it. My neighbors were dairy farmers, so I understand the ethos of northern Wisconsin. My family still lives there. My brother and sister ran a sheep farm up in northern Wisconsin. They have a farm. They still own a farm up there. They still live on it. So, but that being said, our concept for these satellite sites, like up north right now, wouldn't be run by us. We would find somebody, a strong conservative who can write, that we can teach the journalistic style to, the open records laws and things too, and they would run it, like, with our guidance from afar. And the concept is, like, up north right now would have this local conservative editor who's very tied to and connected to that community. And the same would be true of the other satellite sites. And then, of course, like, the stuff that we do, the big investigative pieces and so forth, would be funneled to all of the satellite sites. So, that would be the goal. It wouldn't be us foisting our, maybe outdated knowledge on rural Wisconsin. It would be conservatives from rural Wisconsin being activated by us.
It's kind of like the patch, right? Like, doesn't Pat? Yeah, I think that's a great idea. That's a great model. And there's a lot of people, if you think about it, if you've written a really long Facebook post, and I know a lot of us do, we get in, just turn that post into an article. It doesn't have to be super long. Take that post that you're venting about something that's happening in your community. Turn that long email into an article, and you've got something that's about your community, and it best. I think that's a great idea, and a lot of people are just a little bit of polishing, and I know you guys have helped me take these things and turn them into some kind of piece, and then more people can see it.
All right.
I mean, my idea too is that the local editor could perhaps earn their salary by selling local ads. Like, I'm thinking a car dealership, for example, or a restaurant. They're more likely maybe to advertise on Eau Claire right now, or Green Bay right now, or whatever, La Crosse right now, than a statewide site maybe. And so if there's anyone listening that is just extremely excited about this idea, we're just
there's a bunch of comments where people are like, I want to talk offline.
Yeah, I mean, contact us and make your pitch for why you would be the right person to, do one of the sites. Like I said, I can teach you the journalistic style. We would need someone that honestly is doing it as a cause, because we don't make much money. So don't expect we're going to give you all this money. I mean, that could come. I think that actually could come as these sites expanded, and as we get more funding and things like that. We certainly have the ears of some powerful people, but ultimately Jim and I want to be funded by regular readers. That's why we're pushing this membership concept. because we don't want to be controlled by people. But
Right.
yeah, if anyone's listening, it would take someone very energetic, someone who really cares about their community. One thing I really feel bad about is we do get tips that we just don't have time to do, and they come from local communities all over the state, and a lot of them come out of school issues, education. And I would just love to be able to cover more of them and have someone at school boards and city boards. And you're right, Scarlett, that was the Patch concept, and I was a fill-in editor for Patch, actually. For those that don't know what it was, briefly, Patch was a hyper-local concept created by AOL. And for a while, they had a number of websites in Wisconsin. They tended to be in the suburban area around Milwaukee County. So they were, for example, I was a fill-in editor for Whitefish Bay Patch. There was a Sussex Patch. They were extremely hyper-local. And then they would hire one editor per patch site, and they would kind of do the whole shebang. Some of my students graduated and did that. They paid like $35,000, I think. And they were funded by hyper-local advertising dollars. They didn't work, though, Wisconsin, unfortunately, and they ended up all folding except like one, I think, in Wisconsin. They still exist on the East Coast, but I do think their concept was good. This idea of hyper-local coverage, which is really lacking as the media decline and their profit models struggle. Like we're lacking people who sit at the local school boards and tell us what's going on there.
That's a great idea. I mean, instead of Nextdoor is a cesspool. I'm telling you, you think Facebook's bad? No, I refuse to even go on Nextdoor. Nextdoor is a cesspool, and people they write like novels on Nextdoor, and it's just, during the recall, the things that were written on Nextdoor were so bad, and about me, about my family, that I was like, I'm done. I'm not paying. Who knows? They don't put their name to anything. Who knows who these people are? There are a lot of perverts. It's ugh. So I think get off of all of that stuff that's unhealthy and do something like this. This is productive. And who knows, maybe your story gets picked up and it gets bigger and you hone your writing skills. Just don't waste your time keyboard warring, doing the keyboard warrior stuff. If you're spending a lot of time doing that, you're probably a better writer than you think, and just write an article and start making a difference.
I think Stephanie has the right idea here. Good night, Stephanie, and we're definitely going to have you on. And I know I owe you an answer on the June 4th date. Jessica will talk to you about that.
Oh yeah, me too. June 4th. I know. I'm looking to see.
Are you heading up to Door County on June 4th?
I'm going to try. My daughter's graduation is June 5th, so I have to see if I can make it.
Yeah.
Right. What's going on June 4th? Now you guys got me curious.
Oh no, Stephanie's having her Door County maybe a Lincoln Day dinner or something, and she asked us to go and do it. But I didn't know, because I have two daughters graduating and Annie graduating. I didn't know how that would all work out. So
it's going to be a busy weekend probably.
What do you guys think about ending this? We're at like 3.5 hours here, and I'm
only
exhausted.
3.5 hours.
Yeah.
It's only that. Well, I spent an hour of it ranting and raving at.
I know. So I'm going to end it. But if you guys want to stay on and just chat for a minute after we go off air, that'd be great. But go ahead. Do you have anything else to say?
I just wanted to say thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk. I appreciate it. Thanks for all you guys do.
Great having you.
We love having you on. Come back anytime. Like you were an asset to the conversation.
It's nice to talk to you, Michelle, and and thanks to those in the comments. Whoever, I don't know who Facebook user is, but
I know for some reason their name doesn't pop up, but he's got some really.
But I like all the comments, and it's awesome. I'm glad that we've got this our band of followers. Although I'm missing, who is it? Who's my big fan that wasn't on today? Sarah Ann. Where's
Oh,
she?
Sarah Ann's
yeah.
not on. Yeah, I don't know what happened to Sarah Ann.
What happened to my fan?
Oh, it's Ed. Oh, Facebook user is Ed. Oh, I
Oh,
didn't
no
know that.
wonder. Okay.
Oh,
Is
okay.
it
Sorry about
Delgado?
that, Ed.
I
For
was
some
like,
reason,
oh,
he
I
came
like
up as
that
Facebook
person,
user.
He's
user.
awesome. He should come on anytime he wants to.
Yeah,
He was
anytime
great.
too.
I
And
just
yeah.
love you know what?
Yeah.
Everyone we've had on has been just absolutely fantastic to the point where I'm like, they should have their own radio show. They should have their own radio show. They should.
Yeah.
Like Orlando was great. Nick Harris was great. Michelle's great. Ed Delgado, fantastic people. Come on anytime.
Very good. All right. Good night, all.
Have a good night.
Good night.
It's still live.
I clicked end broadcast. It should be ending here.
Good night, everybody.